There is an expression, a saying in the Islamic context: first we come for the Saturday people, then we come for the Sunday people. The Saturday people are the Jews, the Sunday people are the Christians. I can link pretty much every single public policy disaster that you could think of to the misfiring of empathy. You know what is the most dangerous force in nature? Female sexuality.
Gad Saad, welcome back to the show.
Oh, so good to be with you, Tom.
Dude, really fun to have you. We've already been having a lot of fun before we started rolling here.
We did.
I want to dive right into the deep end. A couple of months ago, you sent out a tweet that said that civil war was coming for the West. And do you think that we were a couple inches from that kicking off when the bullet grazed Trump's ear?
Oh boy, were we ever. I mean, I can't even imagine the world we'd be living in had he not turned to, I'm not much of a believer. Some say it was divine intervention. But whatever it was very lucky, because we'd be in a different world today had that guy succeeded.
What do you think would have happened?
I think a lot of people would have been extremely angry because they would have felt that their voices would not end up being heard. Now, does that mean that we would go into full-blown Beirut, Lebanon civil war tomorrow? No, but it certainly would be stoking the flames of perpetual unrest. But I've been saying, by the way, I've been predicting that civil war was coming for many, many years. Now, again, people think that I'm being hyperbolic when I say that. Oh, come on. Just because of your childhood in Lebanon doesn't mean that civil war is around the corner everywhere. But the reality is, when you see the types of deontological principles that are being violated that made the West great.
What are deontological principles?
So ethical systems come in two forms. There's what's called deontological ethics, and there's consequentialist ethics. Deontological would be if I say, it is never okay to lie. That's an absolute statement. A consequentialist statement would be, it is okay to lie to spare the feelings of my wife if she says, do I look fat in those jeans, right? Well, if you want to be married for a long time, you better put on your consequentialist hat when that question is posed, right? So for many things in life, we're all consequentialists, and that's fine. But there are certain principles: presumption of innocence, freedom of speech, the pursuit of truth via unbiased scientific method. Those can't be consequentialist. By definition, they have to be deontological. Once we start applying a consequentialist ethos to those deontological principles, we're no longer the West. That's what differentiates the West from all of the societies that immigrants like me flee. And so it doesn't take a crystal ball reader to say, look, once all of those mechanisms are eroded, you're going to have the exact same strife that you had anywhere else. So, for example, coming from Lebanon, I know what happens to a society that is organized according to identity politics. Lebanon is the perfect example of a society akin to the one that the progressives here are trying to create, right? I am first a member of a group before I am an individual. Well, in Lebanon, that's exactly how everything is organized. In the case of Lebanon, it's not your skin you. It's not whether you're transgender or whether you're gay or indigenous. It's your religious belongingness. As a matter of fact, in Lebanon, on the ID card that you carry within Lebanon, in Arabic it's called hawiyya, it's an internal ID. The most conspicuous element of your ID card is your religion.
Whoa.
And so, for example, Jews, we're Lebanese Jews, it wasn't even written, so in Arabic, Jew is Yahudi. It wasn't even written Yahudi, it was written Israeli. Israeli means Israelite. So you even had greater animus towards you because you somehow didn't have your Lebanese identity. You were an Israelite, even though we had nothing to do with Israel, right? We're Lebanese, we're Arabic speaking, our culture is Arabic, our food is Lebanese. We happen to be Jewish, but we're what's called Mizrahi Jews. Mizrahi Jews are the Jews from all of the Islamic countries: Libyan Jews, Yemeni Jews, Egyptian, Syrian, Lebanese Jews. These are all called Mizrahi Jews. So we're fully Arabic in terms of our culture, and music, language, and yet we were referred to as Israelites. So now, why was that important in Lebanon? Because when you would be stopped at a random roadblock by a militia group during the Lebanese Civil War, the first thing they would say is, show your papers. If your papers didn't have the right identity marker, it was resolved with a bullet to the head.
Whoa.
Now, there weren't too many random roadblocks that you were going to clear if you had Israelite on your... Now, there might be a few Christian militia groups that might tolerate you and not put a bullet. But most of the factions that were fighting in Lebanon, if you were stopped and you showed that card, you were dead.
Okay.
We got dark very quickly.
No, well, look, this is, to me, the conversation that I really want to map out for myself and certainly want to see other people map out. So when I was watching the Trump assassination attempt unfold, I had the same feeling of, whether you love him or hate him, thank God he did not actually get shot, because I think Trump is a representative of something that's happening. And I mean that in two ways. He's representative, meaning there are people that feel completely disenfranchised, that the system is holding them down, that it is corrupted and actively working against the average American. And so he represents that voice. And then I also think he's literally a representative of the Republican Party who champions for those people and is trying to become the next president. And so if you then celebrate the assassination of that person, you are going to have all kinds of problems. I am very glad that the only sort of celebration is the people joking about, oh, you know, I'm just next time don't miss, or whatever. You've seen a ton of that on Twitter.
Some weren't joking.
I'll assume none of them were meaning it literally, but even then, it's still you're raising the temperature. And this is where I get nervous. And this is why I want people to map this out. And this is why I find it very interesting, this idea of consequentialism versus deontologicalism. I'm not sure if that's how you say it.
Deontological, yeah.
So once you begin to understand that what I'll call narratives have consequences, then it's like, okay, as I put my voice out into the public square, where do I want it to fall? Do I want it to amplify a message? Right. Do I want it to de-amplify a message? Or do I want just a complete non-response to come from me? And when you understand how these things build towards, whether it's all the way to civil war, which is hopefully a very extreme, very rare example, but when you see how these steps march down that path, then this suddenly becomes highly predictive.
Right.
So it is dark, but it's also a part of human nature.
Right.
So how do you view, like when you saw an assassination attempt on a presidential candidate, what did you think?
Yeah, great question. So I actually did an impromptu X Spaces last night where I addressed that. What amazed me is Trump's reaction to that assassination attempt, right? So you may remember, Tom, in chapter 8 of The Parasitic Mind, I have several calls to action. Probably the most famous one that has resonated most with people is when I implore people to activate your inner honey badger. And the reason why I use the honey badger is because many animal behaviorists and zoologists have ranked the honey badger as the fiercest, the most ferocious of all animals. And there are a lot of fierce animals. It's the size of a small dog, yet it doesn't give an F, right? It can go into be stung by a million bees and it'll still get the honey. It could be caught with a boa constrictor that's almost suffocating it. When it gets itself out of it, it doesn't run away. It says, I'm now going to go and kill you. It can withstand an attack of 6 adult lions. And so when I implore people to activate their inner honey badger, I'm saying be ideologically fierce. If you have a set of principles that you believe in, don't cower, don't suck your thumb in a corner and be a fetus. Stand tall and defend your principles. Well, imagine a guy who just got shot at, and the first thing he does is, where are my shoes? Fight, fight, fight. I mean, if you hate Trump, you still have to, in the deep recesses of your mind, say, my God, I do admire the fact that he's a honey badger. So the first thing I felt is, my God, is he going to now turn a lot of people who were on the fence? They're going to say, this is the kind of leader that we want. And I want to draw here some analogies from my evolutionary psychology work. So signaling theory is a theory that is used in the animal kingdom to explain all kinds of signaling behavior. So for example, when the peacock raises its tail, it's a form of sexual signaling, right? It is a behavior and a morphological set of traits, right? It has a big tail, it's iridescent colors. Why would it have evolved that particular physiological reality? Because it is an honest signal of its phenotypic quality. It is saying, despite the fact that having this big tail, I might end up being eaten, here I am still, therefore you should choose me as your prospective partner. So signaling theory is something that I apply in the context of, for example, explaining conspicuous consumption. Why is it that 99% of, and I'm going to come back to Trump in a second, why is it that 99% of Ferrari drivers around the world are male, right? It's not as though there aren't enough female billionaires who could own those cars. It's because men and women use sex-specific products as sexual signals. Men are much more likely to use Maseratis and Ferraris. Women will use high heels and other beautification products. And that holds true across very, very different cultures. So it is a human universal. So signaling theory is something that interests me a lot. So now let's apply it to the context of what happened with Trump. And here I'll draw an analogy. When you go into prison and you're on that first, I've never been to prison, but certainly I understand the dynamics of prison life. When you walk in as a newbie, the first thing that everybody looks at you is they want to see if you're going to be a predator or a prey. How do you walk? Where do you sit? Do you walk tall? Are you confident? Are you assertive? Could this become my little girlfriend or not? And depending on those first few moments, it's going to set the trajectory for how you're going to do your time. Signaling matters. So oftentimes, prisoners will tell you, find someone, if you're a newbie, find someone, beat the hell out of them so that you can then demonstrate to everybody else who's watching that I'm a serious guy. Now let's apply this to Trump. Trump sends the signal to the world, to all the nasty prisoners around the world, the North Korean dictator and the Chinese and Putin and the Islamic thugs. I'm not to be messed with. I can be unpredictable. I'm a rash cowboy. So the exact thing that many people criticize him about, I actually view it as a very powerful signal, positive signal, right? If I have the red button and I start going eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch the tiger by the toe, even though I'm not unpredictable, if I signal to the world, don't mess with me, then people will pay attention. People will fear you. President of the United States should be someone that we fear. It shouldn't be someone who doesn't know if he is a coffee cup or is a human being, right? And so, right? That's why I call him avocado brain. This is not. I'm making light of the fact that he has dementia. Yes, we all will grow old, and we all will face some infirmity in our lives. I'm not being lacking in empathy, but in the president of, I know it's become a cliche to say this, of the free world, I want a guy who is a nasty cowboy. Boy, did Trump exhibit that a couple of days ago.
That's interesting. We should fear the president. Tell me more.
Well, there's a lot of really nasty guys at Corcoran prison, right? There's a lot of nasty guys at San Quentin. If I walk in there and I look like I am meek and unsure and infinitely loving and infinitely compassionate, people are going to turn me into their girlfriend really quickly, right?
So do you mean the international community should fear the president?
Of course. The international community. There are a lot of, I mean, you know, there's the expression, speak softly, but carry a big stick or whatever. I can't remember the exact expression, right?
Yeah, walk softly and carry a big stick.
Exactly. Or might is right, right? So for example, in the Middle East, this is actually a very interesting point. I recently wrote an article about this. So do you know what theory of mind is?
Very much.
Okay, you do. Should I summarize
for the audience? Absolutely.
Okay. So theory of mind is something that is really important in human sociality, because in interacting with you, in order for our conversation to go well, I have to oftentimes put myself in your mind to say, would Tom, even me asking now, should I tell this to your audience? Because they may not know what you know, I'm exhibiting theory of mind. Now, it turns out, by the way, that autistic children don't have theory of mind. So one of the ways that you're able to diagnose that a child has autism is there are certain tests that you could give and they will fail it in terms of not having theory of mind. That's why you see them very closed off in their worlds. They don't read cues and they don't read emotional cues well and so on. Now, why am I talking about all this? I introduced a concept which I called cultural theory of mind, which is, am I able, when I am a leader in the geopolitical ecosystem, am I able to put myself in the mind of this other interlocutor that I'm interacting with? Well, it baffles me to see how Westerners have zero cultural theory of mind. For example, when they interact with leaders in the Middle East. What do I mean by that? Compassion, empathy, generosity, kindness, magnanimity, each of those traits that I just listed are viewed as laudable virtues in the West. What the Middle Eastern mind reads it is weakness, 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 and weakness. So even though we may be sitting and speaking in English, or we may have Arabic translators, we're actually not speaking the same language because we have no cultural reference point that we're agreeing on the shared values. Yeah. And so might is right, and that is a universal. Everybody understands that. So if you go to the East, where I come from, the Middle East, and you exude some of the traits that Biden exudes, then Putin does say, maybe I'll go into Ukraine today. Hamas does say, maybe it's time for October 7th. Now, I don't know for certain that those things wouldn't have happened had Trump been there, but if I'm a betting man, I would say that the chances of those things happening would be much greater if Biden is president than if Trump is president. So being feared as a world leader is a good thing.
What do you think about internally? Because I think a lot of Americans fear Donald Trump, and I think that's some of the derangement. And so when you first said we should fear the president, I was like, oof, because that is I am worried that internally we fear either the president or a boogeyman version of the president, and that fear of our own leader is creating massive problems.
Yeah, well, it's misplaced fear, because if you're going to fear a particular party or a particular ideology based on all the evidence that we've gathered, you should certainly be fearing a lot more the Biden regime than Trump. And that's why I call it misplaced fear, because it's boogeyman, as you said, right? It is Trump derangement syndrome, right? I know a lot of very bright people, some of whom you also know, who genuinely believe that Donald Trump is indistinguishable from Hitler. Donald Trump is indistinguishable from Osama bin Laden. The literal words, right? As a matter of fact, one person that we both know said that, well, he actually admires Osama bin Laden more than Donald Trump, because at least Osama bin Laden was committed to an ideology. He showed discipline and grit, whereas Donald Trump is just a maniac. He is an asteroid hurling at you. Now, if you stop for a second and ask this person, and that person is exemplar of all my colleagues in academia, say, but why? Give me a specific, well, because he's going to institute martial law. What's the evidence of that? I don't know. It's just he's evil. Or he's going to stop us from loving our children. He's going to outlaw food. He's going to, it's this, and that's why Trump derangement syndrome is really an excellent moniker to describe this insanity. Because now, by the way, you tell him, well, okay, well, if he was going to stop democracy and institute martial law, he was president for 4 years. Why didn't he do it? Did he exhibit any of those things that you were worried about? No, it's really in his second term that he will turn Hitlerian. So it's just idiocy, it's imbecility, it's hyperbolic irrationality, and it pisses me off. It's insane.
All right, let me take the flip side and steel man the argument.
Sure.
So at the beginning of this, I was saying one of the things that makes me want to talk about civil war, even though I hope that we're very far away from that, is that there is a clear path that leads from where we are to there. It's a knowable path. It's something you can articulate and say, well, if we go from here to here. So for instance, ratcheting up the rhetoric from left and right, saying that Trump is exactly like Hitler. Well, the logical thing is, if you really knew you had identified Hitler before he had committed his crimes, you knew 100% with 100% certainty that he would, you actually have a moral obligation to take him out. Yeah. So that's a knowable step by step. Yeah. And so people said it. I forget who it was that straight up said, oh God, I remembered it the other day and now I'm forgetting who it was, but they straight up said that the natural conclusion, it was Tucker Carlson. They tried censoring him on social media. Right. They tried getting him censored in inside the government, which I'm blanking on the name of what they call
They
that.
impeached him.
Impeached,
They
thank you,
arraigned
Jesus.
him. They
Exactly. Lawfare, all of
Yeah.
it. And all of it failed. And so he was saying, and I don't know how many months ago this was, but certainly before the assassination attempt, he said the only next step is assassination.
Exactly.
And so it's like, again, these are knowable paths. You can't know them with 100% degree of certainty, but they are knowable paths. So if I'm in the grips of what somebody else would call Trump derangement syndrome, I'd say, hold on. You yourself just said that there is a staircase that leads somewhere. What I'm saying is Donald Trump is walking along that staircase. And so when you get to the point where he, on January 6th, incites people to go in and look, did he hedge and was he over the top? No, but it's very clear if you look at everything that he did not help the situation.
Right.
He very much wanted to find the votes. He very much wanted Pence to come in and say that this is not a legitimate election. And because of that, I do have the real indicators that he's walking the path towards somebody who has said, I want to be a dictator for a day. I mean, he just gives you all the cues. And so, no, in the first 4 years, he did not walk all the way down the path, but he is so clearly on the path. How do people not see this?
You're speaking as a Trump derangement syndrome
Correct.
patient.
I am not putting forward what I'm saying, but I am trying to give them their due in saying every time I go to just be like, what are people talking about? There is the one thing of just, if he had just said, you know what, look, no matter what, I am going to fight this election in the courts. I think it is unjust. I think things have been done poorly. But everybody, the most important thing is that we cue that we're going to transition power no matter what, and then we'll fight this in the known channels through legal courts. If he had done that, there would be nothing to point at. But he didn't do that. And so I don't even need you to buy into January 6th. I just need you to say that he did not handle that in a way that removes that cudgel from being used against him.
Point conceded. Absolutely. And not only that, I mean, not just the January 6th thing he didn't handle well. He is his worst enemy. He does seem to have reined it in quite a bit. Maybe it's age, who knows? Maybe it's some humility, it's unsure what it is, but he certainly seems to be a lot more disciplined in some of his outbreaks, right? So there are many reasons why someone may not like him. But again, part of being a functioning, smart individual, adult, is to have temperance, right? I hate a child molester more than I hate a jaywalker, because I have a calculus that allows me to met out my disdain in a way that is rational and makes sense. Jaywalking might be a crime, but it's not the same as fiddling with kids. So if we're going to use who is a greater threat to democracy, I've seen a lot more evidence that the Biden regime is willing to violate all of our shared deontological principles more so than anything that Donald Trump has done. Did he handle January 6th well? Absolutely not. But if my calculus is which of these two gentlemen has committed greater violations of deontological principles that define the United States, it's not even close that it's Biden.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power. So how do you compete with costs that are spiraling out of control? Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and nobody does data better than Oracle. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/theory. Again, that's oracle.com/theory. Oracle.com/theory. If you're tired of trying to find the real truth, you have to strive to tell whether the news that you're getting is actual real reporting, biased narratives, trolling, selective reporting, whatever the case may be. Then you need to be using Ground News. Ground News compiles stories from across the global political spectrum, giving you every angle so that you can get the full picture and aren't being blindsided. I especially like their election page where you can learn more about candidates, sort news coverage by key voting issues, and get a specific election-related blind spot feed to make sure you're not missing out on important stories. Go to ground.news/Tom or use the link in the video description to subscribe today. If you sign up through my link, you'll get 40% off the same Vantage plan I use to get unlimited access to all their features. I really like Ground News. I think you guys are going to love it. They are doing important work, and I hope you're going to check them out and stay informed and get rid of your blind spots. And this is a great way to do it with Ground News. Give me the greatest hits on Biden. Why should we fear him?
Well, for many reasons. I mean, if we could get all philosophical, or when you have someone who is pushing, I call it DEI, diversity, inclusion, equity, not DEI, because DEI is where meritocracy goes to die. Anyone who defends anything remotely close to that acronym is violating the most fundamental precept of what a meritocratic society should hold dear to it, right? And I see it every day in academia, right? And maybe I could talk about this for a minute or two.
Please.
I mean, what is beautiful about science is that it's objective. I mean, of course, there are biased scientists, but if we assiduously pursue science, applying the scientific method as unbiased as we can, then there are very clear epistemological tools that we can use. Say, this hypothesis looks good, this one we can refute it, and so on. If we want to see which of these candidates are worthy of an academic position, there are very clear metrics we can use. How many papers have you published? How influential have those papers and books been? In the same way that in judging who crosses the 100 meters first is not up for debate. There's a very clear metric that we can use to decide who gets to stand for the gold medal at the podium. Now imagine you take all that and you nuke it with this DEI cult, right? So that now, I mean, this is literally true. This is not Gad Saad satire, okay? University of Waterloo is a prestigious university in Canada that's kind of like the MIT of Canada. It's where a lot of the engineering and computer science stuff has come out of Canada, okay? University of Waterloo just had 2 open professorships. They're called Canada Research Chairs. So this is the most prestigious professorship because it's the Canadian government that's endowing those chairs, right? So this is and they're called Tier 1. It's the most senior chaired professorship. One was in artificial intelligence. The other one was in general computer science. And I took a screenshot of their call. One says, this call for professorship in artificial intelligence is restricted to people who identify as women, transgender, two-spirit, what's the other one? Gender fluid. I can't remember the whatever the other one is. Okay. I mean, literally stuff that you would think is insane. And the other one was only for racialized minorities or those who consider themselves to be parts of racialized minorities. So do you know who Alan Turing is?
Yeah.
Okay. So Alan Turing is a gentleman who, in my view, is one of the smartest minds of the 20th century. So in my long career as a student, I spent many, many years in university. The course that blew my mind the most was a theoretical computer science course called Formal Languages, where a lot of the Turing theories were described in that course. It's a level of profundity that's difficult to imagine that a human mind can come up with that kind. It borders on being a religious experience, okay? If Alan Turing were alive and he applied for those professorships, he would be turned down because he's not a racialized minority or two-spirit.
He's gay.
He's gay. I know. I agree.
And
I agree.
Still,
that might get him somewhere. The gay part might get him somewhere, but it doesn't have the same coolness as it did maybe 20 years ago. You need to be a bit more than gay now. And so imagine that in the 21st century, this is openly, right? It's not something that's hidden in the back pages. That's the official call for for those professorships. So now come back to Biden. Is Biden someone who stands up on the pulpit of the POTUS podium and say, this is insane? Or is he the one who promulgates and sets up mechanisms that promote the die cult? So if only it were that, if on every other dimension he were great, which he's not, and if he only were a supporter of die, he would be a much greater threat than Donald Trump will ever be.
Okay, I'm going to say that in my words and make sure that I understand, because that's a very bold but a little bit abstract idea. Anybody who attacks the foundations of truth are more dangerous than somebody who may want to be a dictator.
But he doesn't. So that's really a hypothetical. I mean,
if he did, would that change your math?
The checks and balances of the American system are such that I can assure you, I can bet every penny that I could ever own that there is no pathway for Donald Trump to ever be dictator. That's the beauty of the American system. There's a million checks and balances, right? It's not it's starting to look like a banana republic, but it certainly historically, the forefathers of the United States were unbelievably prescient in setting up all of these machinations to ensure that none of this could ever happen. So I can't buy into that hypothetical. But frankly, there is nothing more fundamental to the human spirit than the pursuit of truth. If I can get you to stand up as in a confirmation hearing for the Supreme Court and have a senator ask you, tell me what a woman is, and you don't have the epistemological confidence to say, what kind of dumb question is that? Of course I could tell you what a woman is. And she answers, if you remember, well, I'm not a biologist. What could be more dangerous than that? Up is down, left is right. Some women have 9-inch penises. It's the violation of everything that makes us human.
Some women are very lucky, Gad.
Some women are very, very lucky. Right. And so it's not even an abstract sense. In the true definition of what it means to be human is we have a prefrontal cortex that allows us to have a shared meaning for what reality is. Once you engage in the promulgation of these parasitic ideas that I discussed in the parasitic mind, where I no longer feel confident in knowing whether men can menstruate. Listen, Tom, I literally get emails from functioning adults. Dear Professor Saad, I know that you are an evolutionary behavioral scientist who studies sex differences. So I'm just wondering, is it true now that men can menstruate? And I write back, dear so-and-so, no, men cannot menstruate. You can take that to the bank. But the fact that you have created such instability in that person's mindset that they have to get the imprimatur of a professor to tell them, so tell me seriously, because I've got a 15-year-old daughter, is it only her that menstruates, or can my buddy Jack also menstruate? If we've gotten to that point, what could be more dangerous to the human spirit?
It's interesting. So I have no disagreement about anything that attacks deontological truth is going to create derangements that will end the West. That to me is a very concise statement that I will get behind aggressively. It's what I call the physics of progress. So the physics of progress is simply in all aspects of your life, you're asking one question. I know where I want to go, but I don't know how to get there. And so I'm going to run a bunch of tests and see which ones actually move me closer to my goal. Could be being a better parent, could be running a business. But you have to be able to say all the things you think are true, even if they are wildly offensive. If you actually believe this could be true, you need to be able to ask it. And then run an experiment and see if you can get evidence so that you know how to actually progress towards your goal. And assuming that your goal is honorable, I'll just short circuit all the comments. I'm making the assumption that your goal is honorable. It elevates not only you, but other people. Okay, so attacking that is, I have a frame of reference. My frame of reference is grounded in Western values. And so that to me is anathema to the way that we ought to live. I'm making a moral judgment, and I'm very much here for that. What I try to do when I look at people like, take Sam Harris, who's somebody I have a tremendous amount of respect for, but just cannot see Trump in the same light that I see Trump in, which for me is just very much, give me the data, I'll look at it. If I see that the policies he's going to implement do not lead me to where I want to go, then I would be very much against him. And if I see that they are, right now, for me, that one's just simple. Biden has cognitive decline. I am not voting for a mystery set of people behind the scenes like that. That's a non-starter for me. I don't even understand that argument. But I want to look at it from somebody like Sam's point of view and say, okay, if this person really is a threat to democracy, well, I care tremendously about democracy. So then the question moves to, how do we determine if someone is actually a threat to democracy? And that I'm very open to having a debate out in public. Let's see, like, what's the evidence for, what's the evidence against? Because I agree. I very much believe in the government that we have. It has for 250 years given us, I mean, just certainly economically, one of the greatest countries that's ever been on the face of the earth. So, but getting people corralled into how to approach the problem seems like the problem.
Right.
We can't get people to agree on the fundamental frame of reference from which we are going to view this. How do we get people on the same page so that we have a debate that has a knowable outcome?
Right. Phenomenal question. Can I borrow your pen? Because I want to use it as a prop. No. Imagine if this were the cork of a wine bottle. Have I talked about this before?
You have, yeah.
Here or on my show? Was it?
I've heard you speak so many times. About I don't know.
Because it's going to, in a sense, answer your question.
Yep.
So there's an expression in Arabic that says getting drunk by smelling the cork of the wine bottle. So if this is the cork, look, I'm getting drunk, I'm getting woozy, right? It refers to the fact that you are of weak constituency. In other words, that you don't really need to do the hard work of drinking the wine for you to get drunk. You just take a whiff and you're already tipsy, okay? Now, I take that Arabic saying and I apply it to how people make decisions. And so when I say, for example, that you're getting drunk by smelling the Obama cork, look, I'm gonna smell Obama, you ready? He has such a mellifluous voice. He has such a radiant smile. He says such useless, platitudinous bullshit, but it sounds like a Southern Baptist preacher, and so he must be saying something important, right? I didn't say I agree with his fiscal policy. I didn't say I agree with his interventionist or non-interventionist foreign policy. I'm simply getting drunk by the cork. On the other hand, here is now Trump. He's disgusting. He's boorish. Right? He's vile. He's cantankerous. He lacks that presidential quality. He doesn't speak in diplomatese, right? He's in your face. He's a Queen's guy. And therefore, so now I'm going to get more psychological. There's a persuasion model often used in psychology of advertising called the elaboration likelihood model. It basically says that when you're trying to persuade someone, if I'm the advertiser, you're the consumer, I could engage one of two persuasion systems in your mind, either the peripheral system or the central system. Peripheral would be the cosmetic cues. So, for example, if I am advertising a perfume, I don't usually tell you, here is the chemical compound reason why you should buy this perfume, because that's triggering your central cognitive processing. And here, when it comes to a hedonic product like perfumes, it has to be a sexy girl on a horse with her hair flowing, and it just says mystère, right? So I am cueing your peripheral cosmetic system precisely because it's a hedonic product. On the other hand, if it were, here are the 8 reasons why you should invest in my mutual funds, I probably shouldn't use a sexy girl with her hair flowing to try to convince you why you should put all of your retirement money with our firm. I should actually give you real central cues, real substantive cues. And so the problem lies, so to answer your question in this very, hopefully not too long-winded way, when it comes to choosing the leader of the free world, we should be activating our central route to persuasion, but 99% of people activate their peripheral system. So that when I actually engage people and I say, why did you vote for Justin Trudeau? 3 times, right? Because he's young. He looked good with his children in his hand. He's got beautiful hair. He just speaks in a really progressive way. I get it. He's tall. That's very nice. And I could never be president or prime minister because I'm too short. I get that. But other than his height, I got nothing, right? Well, maybe he legalized marijuana and I'm a pothead, okay? So therefore, irrespective of the amount of times that I try to invoke in you some cognitive deliberation that you used in choosing Justin Trudeau, it always ends up with cosmetic Q, cosmetic Q, cosmetic Q. So now let's bring it back to Trump. I think that people like Sam Harris and the rest of those folks, and I talk about this in The Parasitic Mind, view Trump as an existential aesthetic injury, right? See, I'm speaking now as Sam Harris and the rest of those folks. I operate in the rarefied world of the progressive list people in Malibu. And us anointed ones can't really be anointed if such a boorish pig could ascend to the highest office. Now, maybe I'm being Freudian here, but it invalidates my existence as a progressive lisp guy. Look, I speak with a lisp, you see, because I am very educated, right? And so if this pig can become president, it invalidates me. I can no longer look at myself in the mirror and feel good about myself. So he is an existential threat to my ego, not to the world. And therefore, there could only be two worlds. Either I am, in French you say le bien pensant, the anointed ones, the good thinkers, or something is off with him. And so the only way I could reconcile that reality is I've got to bring him down. I think it truly is that, because I've tried to interact with my colleagues who supposedly have many degrees after their names and say, but give me the specifics of why you hate Trump. It's always a reflexive disgust thing. He's disgusting. He's racist. He's Hitler. But why? Give me the specifics. You can never give it to me. And so I think the only way to be able to get people to truly take these decisions seriously is if you can get them to not take the peripheral route and take the central route. But the central route is hard because it involves thinking. Most people are cognitive misers. They want to use mental shortcuts. And one of the ways that you use mental shortcuts is you use emotion as a shortcut to heavy lifting, right? So if Barack Obama, peace be upon him, tells me that Islam is a religion of peace, or if George Bush said the same thing, to be fair, then it's easier for me to simply believe him than to have to go do the hard work of doing a historical and canonical analysis as to whether Islam is peace. He said it, shortcut, it's good enough, Islam is peace. So that's the problem, is that in a world of cognitive misers, people who don't want to think, you want them to rise to the occasion and use their thought process to choose a president. I'm simply not willing to do that because I'm a lazy pig.
Okay, you've got your finger on something that I think is really important. The idea of cognitively miserly from an evolutionary perspective. The brain is just a caloric hog. And if you have to keep that thing fed, you literally want to think as little as you need to, which is why we find ourselves doing things habitually. The brain goes through a process called myelination. It myelinates the patterns of thought literally with a fatty tissue so that the electrical impulses can travel more efficiently, so that they require less calories. So the things that you think a lot, you will think forever. And anytime we can find a heuristic, get that shortcut and just be like, oh, this person said it and I trust them, therefore I trust all of it. Or, and this is really how things break, which tribe am I on? Cool. What are all the tribal patterns of voting? I don't have time to think through them all. Plus, nuanced ideas are very hard to hold, and I may just not be at the intellectual level that I would need to be to think through all of this. So I'm just cool voting down the line. So I think that's so in keeping with the biology of the human animal. I think that all of that is true, and you could be the smartest person in the world. And if you're relying on heuristics and you choose one that isn't based in deontological truth, you're going to have a hard time. Where my mind breaks and where I stop, because to me, so much of this is about narratives, where I don't have a narrative that will complete itself, is that the Thomas Sowell quote seems to be what we live out, which is over the last 30 years, we have exchanged what works for what sounds good.
Yes.
Now, the only way that I can sort of make those connect is emotions. That the reason we go with what sounds good is it makes me feel better in the immediate term. Once I have the emotion, I'm able to make a decision like you were saying. And once I've made the decision, I have no reason to change. Plus, every time that you tell me something that sounds wonderful, it feels good again.
Yeah.
And so I just stay in, but this feels good every time I hear it. I use feels good as a proxy for right. Therefore, I head down this path. Now, once you start doing that, culture will slowly derange over time. And the part that freaks me out is from where I'm sitting, you should just be able to say, well, hold on, tell me what your goal is, and then look and see if the policies lead you towards that goal. And if they do, keep voting for them. And if they don't. Why do you think that breaks down?
So much good stuff there. So first of all, there is a theory in psychology that emotion researchers use. It's called affect as information. It's literally a heuristic where you're using your affective state as an informational input in making decisions. Okay. Now, in many cases, that perfectly works well for the exact reason, the evolutionary reasons that you said, right? So, for example, when my emotional system is triggered because I see 3 young men loitering in an alley and that raises my blood pressure, I get a bit of a fear response. In that context, that emotional reaction was perfectly adaptive, right? On the other hand, if I'm trying to solve a calculus problem on a 100% final exam and I start being fearful, that's probably not a good response, right? So I talk in the parasitic mind, I say that it's not that we are thinking or feeling animals, it's that we use the wrong system at the wrong time. We invoke the wrong system at the wrong time. Regarding the heuristic thing, let me just mention one, if I can get nerdy a bit. So my doctoral training was in the area of behavioral decision-making. And the 2, of course, gurus were Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics for his work in psychology of decision-making, because he showed that contrary to what classical economists think, that we are these perfect calculational machines that engage in an endless utility maximization calculation, we don't do that. We use mental shortcuts. We use heuristics. Where I depart from Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, although I'm a huge admirer of theirs, is that they didn't root their research in an evolutionary framework. So what they did is they put the Homo economicus, which is what the classical economist thinks we ought to behave as rational decision makers, and then they put their weaponry on that and demonstrated that the classical economist was wrong, but they never explained to us why the architecture of the human mind is built the way that it is. So they were missing that evolutionary angle, and that's how I eventually tried to marry my original training in behavioral decision making and with an evolutionary framework. Are you with me so far?
Yep.
So what was I got lost in what I was answering. So what was the question was?
So I'm trying to figure out why people don't realize, oh wait, I can look at where I want to go and I can simply ask, is this policy or this decision in my life actually taking me to where I want to go? I don't understand why people are not obsessed with the outcome they want.
Because I think it's exactly what you said, which is in the immediate temporal window, the feeling good is what keeps me going, right? And forgive I'm not trying to engage in shameless plugging. My next book, which is not written yet, about to sign a book deal, is called Suicidal Empathy. Well, empathy is an emotion, right? Now, empathy, there are very clear evolutionary reasons why our whole emotional system has evolved, right? So for example, envy, while it is part of the 7 deadly sins, also propels us forward, right? So when you think about keeping up with the Joneses, look at the assholes next door that have the fancy car and they're successful. I'm envious of them. Now maybe that will get me off my fat ass and off the couch so that I can match their signal, right? So much of the economy is driven by positional envy, right? And that's perfectly fine. So there are clear evolutionary reasons for why each of the emotions has evolved. The problem is when empathy misfires. So in answering your question in a very roundabout way, so it's very easy for me, because I'm such a progressive, kind, and compassionate person, to say it's unfair that we have the things that we have in the US. Why shouldn't we be globalists and let in anybody who wants to be in on the experience of the American experience? Therefore, it is racist to have closed borders. Why not the Guatemalans coming in? They're hardworking, good people. They should be let in. Therefore, but in this case, when you extend that logic ad infinitum, you then have open borders where 20 million people come in, and then you end up spending more money on the illegal immigrants that just came in than on American vets who fought to protect this country, right? But it's suicidal empathy because I'm a good person. The homeless people should not be marginalized and taken away from their encampments where the kids play, because that would be a double whammy on them. Society's already failed them. That's why they become, I'm speaking now as a kind and empathetic progressive. And therefore, tough luck, kids, if you have to play around with the homeless people while they're shooting up crystal meth and fornicating in the half-open tent. That's just the price you have to pay for being a tolerant and kind person, right? Look, this guy has only been arrested 67 times previously. Don't you think he deserves a 68th chance, right? Because I am kind and empathetic. So at the moment, it is always, exactly to Thomas Sowell's point, it's always easier because I'm such a kind and empathetic person to do that rather than what you were looking at, which is there's a goal over there and I need to reach it, because the short window always overpowers the longer goal. And hence suicidal empathy. I can link pretty much every single public policy disaster that you could think of to the misfiring of empathy. And let me, if I can put it in a greater framework. OCD, okay, obsessive compulsive disorder, is the misfiring of an otherwise adaptive mechanism. Let me explain what I mean by that. Scanning the environment for environmental threats is a perfectly adaptive thing to do. So for example, if you start now sneezing and then you shake my hand and I recoil with disgust and I go and I wash my hands when you're not looking, that makes perfect adaptive sense. What doesn't make adaptive sense is for me to spend the next 8 hours in scalding hot water until my skin starts peeling off, engaging in that ritual, right? So an adaptive mechanism becomes maladaptive when it hyperfires, when it misfires.
Why is it hyperfiring now?
So in the case of OCD,
No. In the case of like what we're going through right now, if this is the death of the West, is suicidal empathy, what created the circumstance that would allow this kind of hyper misfiring, or not even necessarily allow, but create the chain reaction where it just keeps looping up?
So it's several factors, one of which is self-loathing, right? So one of the ways that I am progressive is that it is not okay for me to ever say that the West is a superior society to other societies. As a matter of fact, the way that I show that I'm progressive is by self-flagellating that we are evil and we're slave owners.
When did that take over? Because in the 80s, it was America's the best bitches, get the fuck out of the way. And I don't know when that changed.
So that's a very good question. So in the parasitic mind, I go through all of these parasitic ideas, and the time stamp for each of them varies from 40 to about 89 years, 90 years ago. What makes it that they all then seem to appear out of nowhere is that it takes a while for them to simmer in the stew of bullshit until there's the perfect cocktail to create the monster that we have now, right? So take, for example, cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is the idea that it is imperialistic of you to apply a deontological principle in judging other societies. If other societies say that it is our tradition to cut off the clitorises of 5-year-old girls, who are you, asshole, in Southern California to say that what we do over there is wrong, right? I mean, that's literally the statement. So,
but do you take it as self-evident that that's bad? And if so, why?
Because shouldn't the 5-year-old have the dignity to have their fundamental conduit to sexual pleasure later in life decided by someone else's religious beliefs? I mean, doesn't the child... Now, I hope you're not going to come... Because usually when I say this, someone comes back, but aren't you Jewish? Don't you get circumcised?
Sure.
So, okay, fair enough. That's true. The 8-day-old boy has not given their consent to have the circumcision done on them. If I'm going to get Jewy on you, I would say that does not stop me in the future from appreciating sex to its fullest. Cutting many of the genital mutilation that's done on little girls in some of those societies absolutely does reduce, if not remove, your ability to fully function as a sexual being.
So I have pushback on this take on this argument. So to me, this is where everybody, they start arguing at the specifics, like whether we should circumcise a girl or not. My thing is, where are you trying to end up? People have, if you just make people state what the end goal is that they're trying to achieve, then it's like, it will reveal like, oh my God, I'm speaking to somebody whose values are so anathema to mine that now at least I know where we have to back up. So for instance, if I say, why are you removing the clitoris of little girls? And they say, that's so that they can have a thriving sex life as they get older and we just want to see them happy. Okay, word, like we can prove out whether that works or not. And oh, hey, look, all the women that you do that to, they fucking hate it. If on the other hand, you ask that question and God told me to, and we do this to be right with God, woof. Now, at least I know what I'm up against and all my talk about, but it's going to be bad for them from a pleasure perspective. So like God said to do it and I'm just adhering.
You know what is I've often spoken about this and written about it. You know what is the most dangerous force in nature?
Tell me.
Female sexuality. Meaning that the thing that scares men the most across cultures is female sexuality, right? So
say more.
So I could drill back all the way to evolutionary reasons for that. Mm-hmm. So we are a biparental species. Yes. So if you look across, say, mammals, human dads are actually quite extraordinary dads, in that officially human beings are a biparental species. Now, men do not invest as much as women do, but we are certainly officially classified as a biparental species. Cheetahs, the male, his only contribution is the copulatory act, and then he's gone. Okay, so human dads are actually quite extraordinary in the animal kingdom. Now, I'm going to come back to the thing that you're asking me to comment on. Because we're a biparental species, the biggest threat to my genetic interest, I'm speaking as prototypical male throughout evolutionary history, is that I face the very daunting possibility of paternity uncertainty, right? Therefore, I don't want to invest the next 18 years all the way to the sexual maturity of the juvenile, not knowing if that child is mine or if it's the sexy gardener, right? That's why, by the way, there is a cultural norm. Right? Now I'm going to start really blowing your mind, although I probably did from the first syllable I said anything. But always. When a child is born, Tom, who do the people say he looks like? Dad. Even though objectively speaking, perceptually speaking, that's absolutely not true. And it's the mother's side of the family that is most likely to insist that he looks exact. Now, we can do this test in the Yucatan in Mexico. We can do it in Bolivia. We can do it with the Hadza tribe in Central Africa, and you'll always get that mechanism because we didn't evolve with DNA paternity tests. Therefore, we set up the cultural mechanisms for the DNA paternity test, which is, don't worry, that kid is yours. You have nothing to worry about. By the way, I joke, although it's true, that I discovered in the annals of science the first case of that phenomenon in utero. And let me explain what I mean by that. So when my wife was pregnant with our first child, when you first get the first ultrasound, typically parents will put it on the refrigerator, right? And so that image could look like an alien. It could look like the COVID virus. It could look like a dinosaur. Yet my mother-in-law passed by the kitchen, looked at that alien virus and said, "Oh my God, Gad, the baby looks exactly like you."
That's hilarious.
And then I said, "Oh, that's paternity uncertainty." And I started explaining it, and she goes, "Oh, enough of your bullshit science. Look, the baby has your profile." No, it didn't. It looked like a lizard. Okay. But yet she was compelled as a Darwinian being to assuage my potential fears that, don't worry, my daughter did not go behind your back. This is your baby. Right. So now let's link it back to the issue of the threat of female sexuality. the way that men assuage that very real evolutionary threat is they come up with religious and cultural norms that keep women in check. In Chinese society, I'll do foot binding. In other societies, I'll put the hijab. In other cases, I put the full tent on you. I remove your identity because I'm liberating you from the male gaze. And also God said so, because God is uniquely concerned with men's sexual insecurities, right? In other cases, I will cut off the clitoris because by now reducing the chances of you seeking sexual pleasure, that's how I will be sure to be able to control you. So there is nothing more threatening to male psychology than female sexual emancipation. And therefore, all of these, quote, religious and cultural norms seek to assuage this. God damn, where's the Nobel Prize?
Right? That's really interesting and certainly gives some backup information for how we ended up here. The thing I want to focus everybody on is just when you're having a debate with somebody, first identify what is the base assumption upon which all of their arguments are going to rest. Because whether it's Trump, whether it's Israel-Palestine, whatever, there's going to be some base assumption that they have that they're actually steering towards that maybe they're not even aware of. And if you start asking them, where are you trying to end up? And then to drag them back into deontological waters, I'm just saying, does the thing you're doing here actually lead to that? And if you can get them to say something is blatant, like if God wants us to do this, why does God want us to do this? Now, if you can get them out of the cul-de-sac of God works in mysterious ways and you just get them to say he doesn't want women to be promiscuous. So you're like, okay, so you're doing this specifically to remove sexual pleasure for women. Yes. Now we know where the argument is. Now we know what we're actually debating. And if you can get down to the actuality, a lot of times I find people will confess something that hopefully is so horrifying to them upon realization that they're like, whoa, actually, that's pretty striking. But usually people hit the eject button somewhere along the way of just asking very direct and pointed questions.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think it's too optimistic to think that you're going to use that process on most people. And then when they see the light, they suddenly say, oh yeah, I'm with you. I realized at the end. So I think it's an optimistic objective, but if you and I know anything about how human minds are structured, that's not what people do.
True, but the thing that I think a lot about as a podcast host who does not believe in free will, I think a lot about, despite the fact that we are automata where it really feels like you have free will. So I just act as if I do, but by putting out ideas into the world, I am shaping other people. And
Yes.
other people, by putting ideas out into the world, are shaping me. There's no doubt about that. So it is a very fruitful exercise to put this stuff out into the world. So every time I go through that, start with your goal and then just figure out, is what you're doing now actually leading you to that? One, is where you're trying to end up, your goal, is it honorable? Does it elevate you and other people, or only you? If only you, we probably have a problem. And then the specifics of, is this working? Now, the person I'm engaging with, they may totally disregard it and reject it. But I'm always trying to get somebody to the point either where they're listening and they go, ooh, that's a useful thing, I'm going to take it. Or in that given argument with that specific person, I at least want to be able to say back to them, here's what I believe your position is. Even if it's God works in mysterious ways, God is telling me to remove the clitoris of women at the age of 5, and I do it for that reason, but I actually don't understand why God wants me to do it. Okay. And when I say that back to you, do you go, yes, you understand my position perfectly? If you do, then at least I'm like, I think that way of walking through the world makes absolutely no fucking sense. I think you are on a path to this horrific outcome, but at least I know where you're at.
Right.
You've said I understand you. So now whatever feelings I have about that or beliefs I have about it are not out of confusion, because you yourself have told me, I understand where you're coming from. So now this is my take. But what I find, like if I were to put my finger on the base assumption upon which my whole view of society rests, it's that people do not know where they want to get to, and therefore they cannot possibly hold themselves or anybody else accountable to whether we're moving in that direction or not. And so we end up arguing about whether Trump's tweet was inciting an insurrection or not. It's like, hey, where are you trying to get to?
Right.
And then let's ask, is Trump the person that's going to get us there or not?
Yeah, no, I look, I agree. I should mention though, earlier I said you're being too optimistic about being able to get people to, I mean, it's not really true when I said that, because there would be no point in me waking up in the morning and trying to fight in the ecosystem of the battle of ideas if I thought I could never change someone's opinion, right? Because what would be the point of writing any book? Because you're going to read it, and then I'm going to say, well, your opinion is your opinion, and I'm never going to be able to reach you. So I completely agree with you that there is hope and optimism in saying, I think I could flip most people if they at least give me the opportunity to present my evidence. I think the problem arises with the people who go la la la, so that there is absolutely no way for it's kind of like the analogy I like to use, given that I talk about mind viruses and parasitic ideas, is imagine if I know that if I give you this vaccine, it will absolutely eradicate your chances of contracting polio, but you're an absolute anti-vaxxer. There is no way for me to be able to reach you, and therefore you're likely to get stricken with polio. That's what really worries me, is that there are some folks that I try to engage, and no amount of evidence that I could ever offer them can get them to flip. So then it becomes an exercise in me being able to quickly gauge whether it would be a waste of time for me to engage you or not. Being an optimist like you, and maybe it's presumptuous of me to think that, I feel that given the opportunity, I could flip anyone because truth and the evidence is on my side. But the reality is oftentimes we end up talking like this to each other because the person with whom I'm interacting simply doesn't want to hear it. La la la. I don't know. Have you been able to identify who are the people worthy of exchange because you could potentially persuade them versus those that are impenetrable?
So life has taught me that 2% of the world will take new ideas and go do something with it. That's pure anecdote. It's just the way that it feels. I've never run a specific study or anything, but that roughly feels right. About, I don't know, a decade ago now at this point, I realized in terms of the core efforts of my life, I just have to give up on adults and focus on kids. Kids are super malleable, and that feels like a huge investment of time and energy. So I actually spend most of my time, that's not true right now, but I put a lot of energy into developing video games and comic books and film, and because I think you can put empowering ideas into movies like Star Wars. Actually has sort of Taoism, Buddhism at the core of it. And if you take Yoda's advice, your life will be better. Anyway, that's how I'll play all of that out. But the reason that I put ideas out into culture is that I really believe when culture breaks, people die horrific deaths. They are drugged through the street. They are drawn and quartered. In the West, I don't think, if you don't study history relentlessly, you don't realize what the human animal is capable of. Yeah. And so I've read now just an obsessive amount of history, and it's just one story after another of people killing each other for the dumbest reasons possible. It is realpolitik. It is the strong will do as they will, and the weak will suffer as they must. It is an understanding that ideas grip culture, and everything is downstream of the ideas that grab hold of people. And so because it's not a futile attempt in that, hey, 2% of people can be persuaded, and potentially those are the mavens in marketing speak that then, we were talking about this before we started rolling camera, that most people are just going to follow the Overton window. So this is really a game of the 2% of people that are changeable that will then move the Overton window. How much can I affect them? But if I'm really honest, the reason I do all of this is I'm one of the people that can and will change. And I'm so hungry for things that have utility, beliefs that actually move me towards my goals, that I, in some ways, am just testing my ideas, right? Bring on really bright people, try to learn as much as I can from them, and then bounce a couple of my ideas off them to see, like, is there an obvious flaw in this that I don't see? And then if somebody's just utterly committed to running themselves into the ground because their ideas do not yield the outcomes that they want or that I want, then at some point I just am like, cool, I've said your position back to you in a way that you say, yes, that is my position. It does not seem to have utility. I'll let you go live your life, and I will keep trying to persuade people of ideas that have more utility.
I'm trying to think what would be some personality traits that are predictive of a person being malleable to new evidence. And I'm thinking of the big five, and the big five, right? So I would say probably openness to experience is one that is highly predictive. So I'm willing to bet that both you and I, if we did the big five today, would probably score highly on that. Correct. And that probably also predicts why you're a successful host, because you have the epistemic humility to sit down and say, hey, I don't know everything, and I'm going to speak to some really interesting people, and therefore I'm going to create the environment where I allow the other person to share their knowledge. And I've actually found that the most detestable people that I interact with, which regrettably constitute the great majority of people, don't have that ability. So let me back up. So, the old Confucius thing, know what you know and know what you don't know, and so on, or put in common parlance today, it would be having epistemic calibration. I know what I know. So for example, if you ask me about evolutionary psychology, I'll probably be able to debate the best of them because I really know what I know. But on the other hand, if you ask me, hey, having now had Trudeau as a Canadian Prime Minister, what is the net effect on society of having legalized marijuana? I'm not going to wing it. I'm not going to try to pretend that I know something that I don't. I'll say, that's a great question, Tom. Let me go and do my homework and I'll come back with a better answer next time I'm on the show. Most people don't have that humility, right? And so therefore, when I sit down oftentimes with people that I just meet on the street, and I then walk away from the conversation, my wife says, you seem pissed. What happened? I said, because I just sat there and listened to this idiot pontificating to me for 30 minutes. He never asked me a single question. Because one of the ways that people really enjoy interacting with you is if you just let them speak about themselves, right? And so if I meet someone and say, so what do you do? How do you like that? It's as if they're on my show. But then I realize that they never reciprocate. They'll never find out anything about me, because give an opportunity to most people to talk about themselves obsessively, they're off and running. And so I wonder if there is a set of personality clusters that makes people who are successful entrepreneurs, successful podcast hosts, successful scientists be open to these kinds of interactions. And you have to have that epistemic humility to be able to do that.
I think there is going to be an amount of temperament. So I'm sure the Big Five does have something to say, but the thing that's far more malleable, and I've heard you talk about this, I think you'll back up that we're sort of roughly 50% hardwired and roughly 50% malleable, is to understand frame of reference. Frame of reference is everything. It is a funhouse mirror that we all see the world reflected in, and it distorts it in very particular ways that are super unique to us. And we can change that distortion at any time to see the world slightly differently. But it really does control, it controls both what we look at and what we see. But if you just focus on how you can look at whatever you want, but the distortions in that mirror are going to determine what you see when you look at something. And once I understood, oh, wait a second, it's fake. I'm seeing a fake representation. And that fake representation is a result of the beliefs and values that I have. So if I want to see the world in a different way, I just adjust the beliefs and values that I have. So for instance, if you have a value that says the world is extremely dangerous, you need to look for all the bad things that people are doing, any sign that they might betray you, whatever. You're going to see those signs everywhere you look.
Right.
If, on the other hand, you say, look, the world is dangerous and the only way to navigate it is to find good, loving people out in the world, and to get somebody to work with you, you need to invest in them first. All of a sudden, you're like finding all these kinds of reasons to love people, to do nice things. Both are true statements, by the way. The world is a dangerous place, and hey, you can find cues, but hey, you can also find allegiances. And if you invest in somebody before you ask them to invest in you, they're far more likely to be receptive when you do ask. So it's like, but those two people are going to have very different experiences of the world. And so that is the thing that I'm obsessed with, which my audience will have heard me say a gazillion times, is utility. Does that thing work? Now, the problem is most people accept emotion as, what you call it, affect as info.
Exactly.
They also accept affect as end result. So I view the world this way and it makes me feel good about myself. Cool. When I meet an entrepreneur that's failing, I'm like, I don't need to know a single word. Say less, fam. Before you even tell me your name, your product, anything, I will just tell you there are two things that are almost certainly true about you. You don't have clarity on what you want. This is like every entrepreneur's dilemma. It is hilarious when you start talking to them. Doesn't matter. They could already be doing millions of dollars. They don't know what they want. And then the second thing is that their ego fucks them up when they look at the result of a test, a marketing test that they tried or something, because it's everybody else's fault. It's the market, it's the economy, it's the whatever.
Can I talk about that?
Please.
Sorry, forgive me for interrupting.
No, not
that
at all.
Actually, you probably know this, but maybe your audience doesn't. There is an old psychometric scale. I think it's ROTTR, ROTTR, internal versus external locus of control. So internal locus of control would be, something happened because of my doing. External would be something happened because of external forces. So to your point, and you're exactly right that not just entrepreneurs, by the way, but most human beings have the following self-serving attributional style. Successes are attributed internally and failures are attributed externally, right? So I did really well on the exam, well, because I'm smart and I studied hard. Now, if I did poorly on the exam, it's because Professor Saad is an asshole and he's unfair, right? And so, by the way, do you know who is the singular group of people who don't reliably suffer from that attributional style bias? Clinically depressed people.
Interesting.
Now, and
because they so accurately see themselves as
very good. So
basically,
it's actually a chicken egg question. It's
right.
both. It's you're born with a more accurate attributional style, which predisposes you then to clinical depression.
That is
and
hilarious.
being in a clinical depression makes you more accurate in your attributional style. There isn't that rosy glow. All good things are due to me and all bad things are due to the evil outside world. And so and by the way, I've seen it in my own family because I have in my family, I don't mean my wife and kids, but in my nuclear family, there have been several entrepreneurs in my families, and some of whom have been very successful. Every single time they failed, it was exactly what you said. The consumer was an idiot. They simply didn't understand my genius. And so I remember one of these family members had at one point asked me to serve as their scientific advisor. And I was exactly telling this person, do you not see that you are succumbing to that attributional style? But I was the younger guy, and it was like, shut up with your fancy scientific book stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So they're
Every alarm bell I have goes off when people talk like that.
Exactly. So do you think that part of you having been a very successful entrepreneur is that you didn't succumb to a lot of these psychological traps?
100%.
Okay.
So I had a moment of existential crisis in my mid-20s where I realized I was arguing for dumb ideas because they were mine. And I was like, why would I do that? I
did
want to
say
be
this on my show.
successful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
And then once you realize, wait, I am actually serving a master that I did not realize I was serving, which is a desire to look smart. And so I was like, oh God. So let me now shift over into what are things that actually work and focus there. And once you go, oh, this thing failed because I didn't do the right things. Got it. Now it's like, if I do something different, I can get a different result. If you just live in that loop of, okay, well then what's the different thing that I need to do? And every time this goes wrong, it's entirely my fault. Even when it's not, it's just so much more empowering to go, it's all my fault. Where are the ways? What do I do differently next time? And so my team, sometimes it's hilarious because they think they're talking me off of like some suicidal ledge when I'm like, I'm the reason that episode failed. I'm the reason this initiative didn't work. And I'm like, but you have to understand, when I say that, I don't feel worse about myself. I feel better because I'm willing to admit my weaknesses.
Well, do you remember, I know you had that epiphany when you came on my show and I talked about you having a prescriptive mindset. I'm wondering if we should talk about it now because it seems like an appropriate time to do so, and to your audience, which is a much larger audience than mine. So in decision-making, there are three ways that you could study decision-making. You could study decision-making in a normative way, how you ought to behave. So that's the classical economist who tells you if you prefer car A to car B and you prefer car B to car C, then by the transitivity axiom, you have to prefer car A to car C. If you don't do that, you're violating an axiom of rational choice. So that's called normative decision-making. Descriptive decision-making, which is the world that I have usually inhabited, you just describe behavior. How do people make decisions? How much information do they look at before they commit to a choice? Which, by the way, was the topic of my doctoral dissertation. Prescriptive world in decision-making, where I think you very much fit in. So let's suppose this is called the traveling salesman problem. You have 10 cities that you have to visit as a salesman. You have to visit each one time and return back to where you started. in which order should you visit those cities so as to minimize the travel cost? The solution to that problem uses something called operations research. It's applied mathematics algorithm, but it prescribes optimal behavior. If you wish to, so to your point about what's the goal I'm trying to get to, if I wish to minimize travel costs, this is the sequence in which I should visit those cities to minimize cost. That's called prescriptive decision making. And there's a whole field in applied mathematics and in the business school called management science, where you try to come up with mathematical models to either minimize something or maximize something, right? And in the time that I've gotten to know you in all of our conversations, you are basically on orgiastic prescriptive mode. Every syllable that comes out of you is you solving the traveling salesman problem. And
you make me feel so seen, Gad. It's 100% true.
No,
and
but
it feels so quote unquote right to me that I'm always shocked that not everybody lives there full time.
But okay, so what I'm asking you to speculate here.
This is what happens when you have two podcasters, by the way, doing an interview.
What is it that makes you have such a penchant to, is it that your dad taught you early in life to be a problem solver and therefore?
The exact opposite.
Okay.
I'll call it the Kobe Bryant awakening.
Okay.
Once you realize you can get so good at something that people can't stop you, how you spend your time becomes a spiritual consideration. So it's like, whoa. You're telling me that I can point myself at anything and I can get 100 times better. Now, you're the 50% that's hardwired. It's going to matter a lot. So sure. I'm never going to be good at soccer like you are. For people that don't know, you were a world-class soccer player until an injury. No matter how long I played soccer, I didn't get disproportionate returns to the energy that I put in. But if you take verbal things, I do. So I realized, okay, wait a second. Within the things that I'm good at, I can get really good if I put time and energy into getting better at this thing. And then once you do that, and in my life, this is a real example. I took myself from scrounging in my couch cushions to find enough change to put gas in my car so that I could go to a job interview, to building and selling a company for $1 billion through ideas. Same person was so broke he was scrounging in his couch cushions. And then, 15 years later, same person, but now having learned a bunch of skills, is able to build something of tremendous wealth. And at this point, I've now built 3 multi-million-dollar companies in 3 wildly divergent industries. These are very repeatable things. So now running inside of me is this algorithm that says skills have utility. And I look at a world of people that want things. They have hopes, they have dreams. And I'm just like, your dreams can come true. We're all limited by who we are. But if you can get 100 times better at anything that you care about, the difference is so unbelievable. And so I have this like evangelical sense of the reborn, of being like, in my mid-20s, I thought I was going to be a failure forever. I encounter a set of ideas. They rewarp my lens, the funhouse mirror that I see the world through. And all of a sudden I start seeing a different world, start acting in a different way, and I start getting a different result. Now, when that happens and you love people, all of a sudden you're like, hey, let me tell you about this thing that I call skills have utility. And I'm like, you don't read a book to check it off or to tell people that you read it. You read a book because you can learn how to do something other people can't do. And now with YouTube, you can collect all these skills and do things that people can't do. It's unbelievable. And so because I am a prescriptive personality and I'm so orgiastically in love with the fact that I can learn a thing, do a thing, and then people can't stop me, and I can make my life look the way that I want it to look, it is the ultimate in agency and autonomy. And I just want to give that gift to everybody.
Do you have a sense of how foolproof that prescriptive trajectory is? And before you answer, so I had maybe 2-3 months ago, a impromptu X Spaces with Elon Musk, right? And a lot of the questions I was asking him is, what part of entrepreneurship do you think is born versus, made, nature, nurture, and so on. And in answering one of the questions, he said something that actually an economist at my alma mater had also said, his name is Bob Frank, that luck, I mean, it sounds hocus pocus, but that just to put it in fancier terms, the stochasticity of life is oftentimes the thing that stops that prescriptive, foolproof thing from working. So if someone comes to you and they're fully invested in learning the recipe that you're willing to impart and share with them, how much of that could be short-circuited by shit happens in life, so that steps A, B, C, D, even though I can almost guarantee you they're going to lead to where you want to go, actually end up failing? What's the failure rate due to stochasticity?
Okay, so now we're talking the second law of thermodynamics. So one of the most important things you have to get an entrepreneur to learn, or somebody trying to win a gold medal in the Olympics, in judo, let's say.
Are you using that example from my brother?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You have to get them to understand that everything really does move towards chaos. The reason it feels like the world is working against you is because it actively is. In business, or again in sports, for every day that you're training in judo, somebody else is training. And they may even be specifically training, trying to beat you. There are companies right now, I'm a podcaster for the love of God, and I make video games. It's like two things that everybody and their dog is trying to do. So it's like there are people that are actively trying to learn what I do and then do it better than me. So you're up against that at all times. So now the second law of thermodynamics also states that the only way to bring order to the chaos in a closed system is by pouring in energy. And so now it's just like, hey, nature has already given you the blueprint. If you want to do a thing, you're going to have to work extraordinarily hard in what I call the physics of progress, because you can't do this dumbly, if you want to then outperform your competitors. And so there's a whole nest of values and beliefs that people would have to have the right frame of reference to do it. Most people, no matter how great their efforts, are going to be consumed by the fact that the world is actively working against you. And so just be careful what you pursue. And so I think the right fundamental question to ask in life is not what would I do if I knew I couldn't fail, because failure is the most likely outcome. What you should ask yourself is, what would I do and love every day, even if I were failing? And if you do that, then you're going to be fine.
Do you have a sense, out of all the people that have been privy to your teaching, what percentage, once they implemented it, have found success?
I ballpark it at 2%.
Is that right, huh?
Most people will quit. The reality is success is
because they didn't implement your prescriptive trajectory, or they did, but just shit happens.
No, it's not even that shit happens, because you will, no matter what, if you're living in the physics of progress well, you will make advancements. You may never have the $1 billion exit, but you'll do very well for yourself. What ends up happening is people use affect as information. See how fast I learned?
Look at you.
And they fail at something. It makes them feel badly about themselves. They take that information to mean that this process sucks, and they quit. That is 98% of the world.
Got it. The gentleman, if I remember my reference well, or my citation, the guy who is most associated with the affect as information shortcut is a professor of psychology. I recently gave a talk at USC where after I finished my talk, the audience was astoundingly hostile, and he began the berating. He was the guy who asked the first question, and super progressive, super woke. I was talking about deontological versus consequentialism and so on. They weren't happy that I said anything complimentary about Donald Trump. And it's funny because I revered and respected this guy as a very serious, highly cited academic psychologist. And I do believe that he is the gentleman that developed the idea of affect as information. And then I saw him acting in the parasitized, unhinged way that he did. And all of that intellectual capital that he had built in terms of the respect that I had for him as an academic psychologist went out the window. The only reason I'm saying that story is only because we mentioned the affect as information, but it also demonstrates how someone can be astoundingly accomplished in academia and yet in other facets of their lives be complete babbling idiots.
Yeah, I think it's because they're running a frame of reference that doesn't make sense. So their frame of reference allows them to thrive in academia, but it is missing a core component, which to me, by default, I always just assume they don't know what they want, or they're not living in a loop of how you actually get to what you want.
Right.
And so then it's deranging. And they just have what's happening is you're having a collision of either values or beliefs. So values being the way the world ought to be, beliefs being what you think the way the world actually is. I would love on like Twitter for everybody to focus on, okay, hold on, I want to understand your position. What are you actually saying? Like right now, man, I would love to sit down with Destiny, not to debate him, but to understand something broke in my map of his mind. And so I bet if you asked him, he would say, I'm acting completely in accordance with my belief system, the person that...
This is the guy who had a reaction that was unsavory toward the Donald Trump assassination. Is that
correct? The guy that got killed, he's like making jokes at his expense and said that I would make jokes of anybody that supports this traitor Donald Trump. And Destiny is a very smart person, but I can no longer predict the things that he's going to say, which means my map of him has broken. And so I want to understand what belief that he holds am I missing, or what value set that he holds am I missing. So for instance, the first thing that put this on my radar was he said, I don't have sympathy for Donald Trump or any of his supporters. And that includes the guy that got killed. And I was like, whoa. So that violates my frame of reference, because my frame of reference is I don't want to see people die. And I for sure have sympathy if it had been somebody that I don't want to see get elected. I certainly don't want to see them hurt, killed. That's just horrifying to me. This shows how politically, actually, I'm not super political. The stuff that I touch on that's political is because it is cultural in nature. Those are the things I talk about. But when Nancy Pelosi's husband got hit in the head with a hammer, and some people were like making jokes about it and stuff, I was like, yo, imagine someone showing up at your house with a fucking hammer and beating your head in. Dude, I don't care. Like, that's nasty. I just don't wish that on anybody. So anyway, when he said he didn't have sympathy, I was like, whoa, something in my mental map of him is broken, because I don't understand how somebody comes to that conclusion unless they say my enemies are worthy of
derision.
Not only derision, violence.
Yeah.
And that if it happens to them, I don't give a shit.
Well, because he's bought into Donald Trump is indistinguishable from Hitler. Therefore, if you are a supporter of Hitler, then by any stretch of the imagination, you are a reprehensible human being.
I don't know that I want to put that on him, because I've never heard him say it. It's possible. Yeah. It's possible. I just haven't heard it.
Okay.
But even if that's what he's saying, what I want to understand, because it filters down into, and thusly I have no sympathy. So what I want to know is, okay, I need to know your worldview. So your worldview is such that if somebody is bad for democracy, that anything goes. If somebody is a traitor to their country, because he has called him a traitor, anything goes. Like, or not anything goes, but getting shot in the head, that's still funny. Like, I really want to hear, again, going back to, I'm not going to judge him until I understand what he's saying. I can tell you that it triggers my moral alarm bells. It feels absolutely heinous. But because I don't understand yet his own position, I could not say his position back to him without guessing. I first want to understand it. If you want to have a solid strategy in place to grow your business, you need to have a very clear and accurate picture of the business finances as your starting point. But managing finances has historically been a tedious and time-consuming task that very few entrepreneurs want to make time for or even have time for. Now, however, you can revolutionize the way you manage your business finances with QuickBooks, the #1 accounting software for small businesses. Bookkeeping with QuickBooks is easy, with one place to track expenses and inventory, organize and manage bills, send invoices, calculate tax and deductions, and compare projects for profitability. And with QuickBooks Payroll, you can streamline payday, track time, manage HR, and offer team benefits. So discover why 88% of customers say QuickBooks helps their business be more successful and save yourself time by bundling bookkeeping and payroll. Just click the link below to get 50% off 3 months of QuickBooks Payroll. Try it today.
So let's contrast this guy with. Do you know who? I think his first name is Hawiya. I think Sinwar.
Never heard that.
I think I mispronounced his first name. Sinwar is the Hamas leader who was in a Israeli prison for his terrorist activities, was diagnosed with a very aggressive brain tumor, and the Israeli surgeons cured him, removed the tumor, saved his life. He was released from prison, and he was one of the architects of the October 7th reality, right? So now contrast, I don't know who this Destiny guy is, but in his case, he's saying, look, my moral calculus is such that if you are a supporter of Donald Trump and there's a bullet that hits you and you die, then I think that's a good thing. Talking about deontological ethical systems, the Israeli surgeons abided by the Hippocratic oath that said that deontological expectation supersedes even any disdain that I have for my most avowed enemy. In this case, I mean literally, right? Like a leader of Hamas who's in prison. Because I've taken the Hippocratic oath, I have to save that person. And I think that's actually one of the problems that we're seeing, talking about our earlier conversation about some of these deontological principles being violated. It used to be that you would think that the Secret Service transcends politics, right? Once I decide to sign up and take an oath as a Secret Service agent, then it doesn't matter whether the guy that I'm protecting is of this political persuasion or that. That deontological expectation supersedes those political machinations. If I am a physician and I take the Hippocratic oath, that supersedes anything. If I'm a Jewish physician and I get a Islamic terrorist, I am bound to save their life. I should show you from McGill University. McGill University is it's the top university in Canada. It's typically referred to as the Harvard of the North. Consistently gets ranked in the top universities in the world. Its medical school is one of the top medical schools. I received anonymously from a medical student at McGill information from third, fourth year medical students and residents who are Islamic, and the things that they're saying about Jews in terms of if they were their patients and so on. That's a problem, because that deontological expectation that is enshrined in the Hippocratic Oath, for those who don't know, the Hippocratic Oath comes from Hippocrates from several thousand years ago, the founder of modern medicine in ancient Greece. Nothing should violate that Hippocratic Oath. But yet once I start meting out my medical intervention as a function of whether you're in my tribe or not, the whole system breaks. That's what you expect in the Middle East. That's not what you expect in a medical resident in North America. But now that's becoming normalized. And so, unfortunately, I think Destiny is suffering from that deontological violation.
It's interesting. I'm not close enough to it yet to know whether he is or not, but there's certainly enough evidence of things like that happening now with DEI or DIE, as you say. Walk me through some of that. So I want to look at this through the lens of Canadian immigration. So you said something that I had literally just no idea. You said if you live in Montreal, and that if you go out in the morning to get a cup of coffee, and if you walk past 20 women, 12 of them will be veiled. Now, do you mean a full hijab?
Hijab, not the full niqab or burqa.
Okay.
Those you still don't see too often in Montreal, but wearing the head covering, so the hijab. Now, that when you're doing that, you may be a lovely person, right? Again, I find it cheap and unnecessary to always say, oh no, but there are infinite number of lovely Muslims.
I think it's important.
Okay, fair enough.
Especially if you're going to get clipped, which you will.
Exactly, fair enough. Okay, well, I have more Muslim friends and fans than most people will ever meet, okay? I come from that region. I speak the language. That's fine. But once you wear that scarf, you're saying, I pledge allegiance to that religion. Part of that religion has some really, really nasty things to say about me, my children, my wife. Therefore, do I have the evolutionary right to be concerned that the demographic reality of my city is getting Islamized at a very large rate? Well, I think any normal person would say yes. So I'll give you context. We moved to Montreal in 1975, first year of the Lebanese Civil War. From 1975 till about the late 90s, I saw a single woman veiled. In all those years, one time I saw a woman veiled. And then it was 10 women. Then it was 60 women. Then it was 6,000 women. Now we can walk in old Montreal, as we did about 2 weeks ago. You wouldn't be able to tell that this was a Western city. The non-hijabbed women were in the minority. That can't bode well. That doesn't mean that each of those people is not lovely, but if demography is truly destiny, right? There, in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, it's the OIC, it's the umbrella group that puts together all the Islamic countries in the world. There's 56 Islamic countries in the world. And the 57th would be the Palestinian territories, okay? So 56 plus the Palestinian territories. Each of those societies was once 0% Islamic. None, zero. And then one day you closed your eyes and you opened your eyes, they became 99% Islamic. Now, in some cases, it was very violent. It was with the sword of Islam. But in other cases, it wasn't. It took 500 years for the Islamization to happen. It was done very gradually. So it's not as though the Islamization of a society is always through violence. I mean, it often is. In the majority of cases, it is. Islam is a colonizing force, right? So if you care about the Jewish colonialists in Israel, then you certainly should worry about the 400 million colonialists that surround Israel, which once upon a time, none of those societies were Islamic, right? So my concern, whether it be in Montreal or it be in Dearborn or it be in Minnesota where we've got, right, is that demography is destiny. And most people don't have the imagination to extrapolate into the future, right? Because I live in Newport Beach where I don't see that, so it probably doesn't really matter, right? There is no such thing as diabetes because I don't have diabetes. But it only knocks on the door and becomes relevant when I get diabetes. Then diabetes begins to exist. So, for example, you see today a lot of the Jewish billionaires that are there are alumni from many of these prestigious universities. All of the years that some of us were standing on top of the mountain and screaming, they said, doesn't really affect me. But when it affected your son at your beloved university post October 7th, you woke up and said, ooh, what's going on? But all the signs were already there for you to see them, but you simply didn't have the imagination to extrapolate that it was coming for you because it didn't affect you personally. That's one of the things that I find the most regrettable about the architecture of the human mind, which is most people completely ignore a problem until it literally bites their ass. Until then, it doesn't exist, right? And so guys like me who stand on top of the mountain saying, look, it's coming for you. You don't know how many emails I receive, Tom, from people who say, oh, I should have listened to you about such and such. But at first they would mock me and say, aren't you being Islamophobic? Aren't you being hyperbolic? Aren't you exaggerating? But now their child goes to a school where they're being bullied because they are in the minority in their school. Go to France and see what's happening. Go to Malmo, Sweden and see what's happening. Go to Germany and see what's happening. Look, it doesn't take a fancy professor to know this. All societies are not equal. Not in the sense that necessarily that this is superior to this one. Some societies think that there is a very effective conversion therapy for it's a gravity-based conversion therapy. We throw you off rooftops and that solves your gay issues, right? That's called Gaza. On the other hand, Tel Aviv is a very LGBTQ friendly place. As a matter of fact, arguably it's the third friendliest. Number one, San Francisco. We can argue maybe New York. Montreal is very gay friendly. And then we could probably argue that Tel Aviv is one of the most LGBTQ friendly places. So if you are someone who presents yourself to the world via your queer identity, it is difficult to understand how you would be queers for Palestine. That's what parasitic thinking is. How is it that if you are so vested in your queer identity, you're not going with the society that celebrates your queer identity, but you go for the one that reviles, detests your...
What's the answer to that? Because there is an answer.
So here, by the way, is where I this is where the metaphor of the neuroparasite is very apt. So let me give you a few examples. The wood cricket, literally a wood cricket, abhors water. It doesn't want to go in water. When it is parasitized by a hairworm, the hairworm needs for the wood cricket to jump merrily into the water, because in order for it to complete its reproductive cycle, it needs to happen in water. So it literally rewires the wood cricket's brain so that when it typically abhors the water, it now merrily jumps in and commits suicide in the service of the reproductive interests of the parasite. And that's why the parasitic mind became the success that it did, because it aptly and accurately and poignantly captures what happens to human brains when they are prone to ideological rapture. So Anna Epstein, do you know who Anna Epstein is? No. Anna Epstein, Jewish Anna Epstein, who went, I think, to either Boston College or Boston University, I can't remember which one it was caught on camera, on tape, ripping off the photos of the kidnapped Jewish babies.
Yep.
So imagine if you're the parents of Jewish Anna Epstein. I'm paying $80,000 for you to go to Shishi Boston College, and the best use of your time to demonstrate your bona fide progressive credentials is to rip down the posters of the kidnapped Jewish babies. Now, had you, Anna Epstein, been at that Nova Film Festival, there would have been a nice lineup for the gang rape that you would have experienced. But you're progressive, you're enlightened. You're not like this bigoted guy in Montreal called Gad Saad who's warning you about what's coming for you. You've transcended that. Therefore, you are ideologically parasitized. So that's how you explain it. It literally is that, right? So Queers for Palestine. I also
But can you speak directly to what value? She's got a collision of values, right? So it's easy to talk about Queers for Palestine. That's just a self-evident collision of values. So Palestinians are not pro-LGBT. And obviously, if you're LGBT for Palestine, you are. So the question becomes, they then have another value that's riding in a more important place than that. So,
I will not succumb to bigotry.
Okay.
There is nothing worse than for me to be bigoted against the noble beliefs of others. That's the highest virtue that I can attain. And when I say that Islam might contain tenets that are fully incompatible with our values, that feels icky. That's gauche. That's ugly. I've been taught that there is nothing more laudable than being accepting and tolerant of the noble people over there. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the way that I demonstrate that is that I will show that by ripping that, because I hate Zionists are pigs. Zionists are the really, and my parents are Jewish. I'm speaking as Anna Epstein now, but I renounce that because it is bigoted. By the way, I have a good friend. Her name is Fatima, and she's really lovely, and she's never beheaded anyone. Let me tell you a quick story. 2 quick stories. You ready?
Is this about Fatima, the person who doesn't behead?
It's sort of.
She's my favorite.
2 stories that I actually describe in the parasitic mind that perfectly captures parasitic thinking. And I'm almost certain I didn't discuss this before on your show, so hopefully it's new territory. Story 1. Tal Nitzan, doctoral student, Jewish Tal Nitzan, doctoral student at Hebrew University, prestigious university in Jerusalem. She's doing a doctoral dissertation. She's studying the rampant instances of the IDF, the Israeli soldiers, raping Palestinian women. She goes out and tries to uncover the rampant, the epidemic proportion of rapes. She comes back with not a single documented case. So her hypothesis, her driving hypothesis for her entire research has been falsified in the most astounding of ways, right? What do you think she then concluded?
Well, I know the punchline.
Or you know the punchline because you've heard
yes.
me say it. Okay. I wish that we can, well, thank you for your honesty. I wish that we can poll your viewers, because I'm almost certain that not a single person would guess it.
It would be surprising if they did.
It would be, exactly, because it's almost impossible for a well-functioning human mind to engage in such diabolical, orgiastic, parasitic thinking in quote. She says, aha, the fact that the IDF soldiers don't rape any of the Palestinian women, look how much they marginalize them. They hate them so much, they other them so much that they're not even worthy of being raped. So that's why in the parasitic mind, I have a section called All Roads Lead to Bigotry, right? If the IDF soldiers had raped the Palestinian women, they're evil Zionist Jewish pigs. If the IDF doesn't rape a single Palestinian women, they're evil Jewish Zionist pigs. So all roads lead to, and this is Tal Nitzan saying it, Jewish Tal Nitzan. What could be more parasitic than that? Second story that kind of speaks to the Fatima angle. A Jewish woman whom I had originally met at university, she was an administrator, we had become friends, approaches me, I think in 2010, and says to me, sends me an email, and I've kept all those emails, by the way. I have them locked and loaded. She says to me, Gad, you know a lot. You come from the Middle East. You know a lot about Islam. I'm very good friends with a woman who, Muslim woman who is doing her PhD in Islamic studies at McGill, and she's telling me that Islam loves the Jews and reveres the Jews, and that there's no such thing. It's a misunderstanding that there's any animus towards the Jews. What's the real answer? So I send her about a 20 or 22 minute montage, not created by me. It was an existing one, where it was covering a huge swath of imams, Islamic scholars, actors, things that are taught in kindergarten, fables, soap operas, that are speaking about her question, what does the Islamic world think about Jews? And it is stuff that would, if the Nazis were watching it, they would say, ooh, even by our standards of Jew hatred. I mean, we're champion Jew hatred. I mean, hey, we wanted to exterminate Jews. So we really are Olympic level Jew haters. Even by our standards, this seems over the edge. It's a bit too much. Goebbels said that, and Himmler and Hitler got together. Guess what her response is to me just sharing that clip? See, that story you don't know.
No, I don't know this one.
You know what, Gad? It seems like you're no different in your extremism than they are. So let's step back. You reached out to me and asked me a genuine question about what is the official position of Islam about the Jews. I share with you one piece of evidence, which is a 22 minute montage. And that leads you to think that I am no different in my extreme. Now, why did she say that? It speaks to your earlier question of why was she doing that, Anna Epstein? It feels icky to her because she has a very good friend. I'm going to call her Fatima, but whatever her name is. Fatima is a lovely girl. They go out to coffee together. She's never uttered a single syllable that is negative towards the Jews. As a matter of fact, they're friends and she's Jewish. So now here comes this guy who has spicy language, who can be irreverent, and he shares this clip. There are two things I can do here. I can either look at that clip and go, holy moly, that was ugly, or I can shoot the proverbial messenger. You know what, Gad? You're indistinguishable in your bigotry. So my sharing the Jew hatred of the other is indistinguishable in my being a bigoted towards Muslims.
All right, this obviously only works on the people that are willing to have their minds changed. But one thing that I often don't see in debates of these styles is asking the person to basically lay out their values. So, okay, Queers for Palestine, nice and easy. It's a great collision moment. What do you care about more? I don't want to be bigoted. Okay, so is there anything that another culture could do that would make you say, no, I can't be on board with that, even if it means that I am being bigoted towards you? No, there's nothing. Okay, now we know. Literally, they're tossing kids into a meat grinder. and you're going to be fine. Yep, I'm going to be fine. Okay, cool. I at least know where they're at. Getting people to say their value system in like order of priority is, I think, a really clarifying thing, oftentimes for people, because I don't think that they've gone any farther than when I think about, to your point, about thinking my way of doing things is better than theirs. It makes me feel icky. I've heard this whole story about being a colonialist. I don't want to do that. America, I think from an American context, I'm sure it's very similar in Canada. We just wiped out the natives and we just took their land. And I know all of South America, basically the same thing. None of this feels good. We had slavery. Like, this is just all bad. There's no way for me to justify this. And so, yeah, my life is great. There's a Starbucks in every corner. I'm warm in the winter. I'm cool in the summer. This doesn't seem like a big deal. I don't want to feel icky. And so they're stuck at that layer. They don't understand that they have a competing value system in their own minds. This is why when people ask me about my success, I always say there is a line of demarcation when I realized I was living in service of a value I didn't even know I had. And then once I forced myself to articulate what was actually governing my behavior, I was suddenly like, whoa, I don't want to do that. And so by then having to document what my values are, rank them, all of a sudden I was like, oh shit, I actually want to change some of this so that now I can move in a direction. And so getting people to talk about that, and look, I get that it will have limited utility. Some people won't do it, but it's like, until we can do that, we're not going to make progress. And so I saw a debate with, ironically, Destiny and Norm Finkelstein.
Oh, yes.
And like 20 minutes into the debate, I realized, guys, until you ask Norm one very simple question, should Israel exist, you're never going to make progress, because you're arguing at the level of specifics, what my wife and I call don't argue about the tea. The biggest fight we ever got in was over a cup of tea. And of course, we realized there's no way we're actually arguing about tea. And we finally got to the real issue. So Norm's whole thing is Israel should not exist, period, end of story, just no ifs, ands, or buts. And so any argument you give me about, well, but on this day it was promised, or but they attacked on this day, and because of that, there's going to be retribution, it's going to be nonsensical for him.
Right.
But somehow the debate is never about Israel shouldn't exist, convince me otherwise, because that's all anybody should be talking about, is right there at that level. So now the hard question that I have is, okay, you're tense about people, and I would be too, because look, at the end of the day, in fact, to make my position very clear, here's my base assumption. I have a set of values. I don't even need people to believe that my values are better, but I will simply say that I have a North Star of human flourishing for as many people as possible. And I'm going to hold my values and beliefs to account for whether they're moving us towards that or not. Now, anybody that takes a different approach, I am going to have a problem with that, but that's my value set. Yep. Now, I live in a place where my value set roughly is dominant. So I feel completely good and comfortable with the way things that move, even when I disagree with things at the margin. So I live in a country that has Western values. I'm going to be tense to anybody that doesn't want to assimilate. And I'm going to be excited about anybody that does want to assimilate. So I grew up in a melting pot. I could not care less what your background is in terms of your ethnicity. None of that matters to me. But I care a lot about your values. Now, if you're coming here and you want to be as like 80s American as I am, and be like, you're down for Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone movies, you're my kind of person. But anybody that is going to make me feel uncomfortable having those values, then I'm going to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I would defend my value set.
So let me just build on what you just said. A lot of the people who will come in who do want to change your value system won't at first, because the numbers are not in their favor.
Yep.
Right? So it really is a numbers game. I mean, it really is that simple. There's nothing complicated about it. So I wrote an article once about cultural homophily, right? Homophily is being attracted to similar things, right? So for example, in
School of Fish.
Right. In human mating, it's birds of a feather flock together. The successful marriages are the ones where the two partners have shared life goals, objectives. If I'm a caustic atheist and you're an avowed Catholic, notwithstanding the lovely mantra of love will conquer all, we're starting off on the wrong statistical foot. And that statistically, we're not putting all the bet in our favor. Okay. So cultural homophily basically says that it makes sense for me to bring in immigrants who share the foundational values on which my society is built. Therefore, on average, if I bring in a lot of people who come from Argentina or who come from Denmark, I don't care about their skin color. I don't care about their religion. But to the extent that if there is a metric on which we can measure the foundational cultural distance between us and them, they're going to be closer, then those people are simply going to have a greater likelihood of assimilating. So therefore, we've had in Montreal, I mean, Montreal is truly a multicultural city. Tons of Jamaicans and Haitian and Italians and Greeks and Vietnamese and Korean, and right, and everybody gets along. Islam comes in, we start seeing a problem. Why? Because what is at the root of the tenets of Islam? Is it one that teaches that we should all get along, or is it one that says that we will all be united peacefully under the unifying flag of Allah? Oh yeah, it's the latter one. Now, is Islam a proselytizing religion, or is it one that says, like in Judaism, why is it, by the way, that there are only 15 million Jews in the world? I mean, we really suck at increasing our club. Well, it's because if you tomorrow, Tom, decided that you wanted to convert to Judaism, canonically within the tenets of Judaism, everything will be done to try to dissuade you from converting, let alone the fact that the conversion process is a very long one, because the idea is that you have to be truly pure in soul in why you're converting. And so we're going to constantly test you to dissuade you from coming into the club as a costly signal of your true wish to want to belong. Now imagine if another religion says that my fundamental goal is to turn everyone who is not like me, and all you need to say is a single sentence publicly, and voila, you become part of that club. Therefore, you don't need to be a big marketing genius to say which one is going to attract more customers. Is it the one that doesn't allow for many conversions, or the one that proselytizes as its fundamental value? Well, Islam does that, right? And therefore, there's always going to be frictions once the two cultures clash with each other. That's why Samuel Huntington wrote a very famous article in, I think, 1993 on the clash of civilizations. He was talking about the Islamic versus non-Islamic world. Again, I don't need to be lectured by people about the fact that Islam has done wonderful. The Islamic architecture, there was a time when there was Islamic Renaissance where it's true that Europe was in the Dark Ages. And of course, I mean, people are people, humans are humans. There are smart and bad people in every faith and so on. But the codified tenets of Islam, do they allow, to use your terms, maximal human flourishing? Well, nothing could be clearer, and the answer is no, in that it doesn't grant you the dignity of individual freedom, right? And therefore, it's going to clash with a society that is built on individual freedoms and individual dignity. Now, again, today, when Islam in the United States is at 1.5%, 2%, you're not going to see it much. It's not going to matter. When it's going to be 10% and 12% and 15%, you're going to be sending me an email saying, ooh, I think I should have listened to you. By the way, to close the parenthesis on that woman that I had sent her the clip, about 3 months ago, Tom, she sends me an email 14 years after that original exchange. And she goes, I don't know if you remember. Oh, I remember. You're in the parasitic mind. Although I didn't mention her name.
Right.
I didn't violate her identity, but she probably didn't read the parasitic mind, because she's saying, I don't know if you remember, we had a spicy exchange 14 years ago where, and well, now I've kind of come around to seeing it. Well, yeah, because now you live in Montreal and you're seeing the changes of the past 14 years. And probably your kids were beaten up at school because they were not Muslim. And so that's the regrettable part, which is we could solve this problem today with less bloodshed, or we'll solve it tomorrow with more bloodshed. People will wake up. The problem is that the autocorrection will not be peaceful.
Yeah, so it's this is an intertwined web that I'm just now beginning to think through. But one question that has to be asked is, to me, this is just how global movements work. And so we think we're at the end of history, but the reality is that we're not, and that people are conquered, colonized, just savaged throughout all of history. And if you look at migratory patterns, so you're looking at Montreal and saying, hey, I don't want to have a bunch of people that don't share my values. I have a feeling you'd feel that about any place that was going to want you to live under their values instead of just leaving you be. So can be Muslim, can be whatever.
Could be Martians.
Right. So I don't want people to overly focus on Muslim, though that is the reality that we're talking about right now. But that is uncomfortable for you. But this is exactly, from my early read, and tell me if you think I'm getting something wrong, exactly how Israel ended up coming to be. Was like, hey, we want to get more and more Jews that have been scattered all over the world come in. Just first, it's about numbers. It's about getting people here slowly, slowly, slowly. And so how do you think about that when it's like, okay, at one point, for some people that you will forever be tied to, whether you agree with it or not, but Jews went and literally made a nation by slowly moving into that space. And now I see it playing out across Europe. I see it playing out in Canada. I am sure it's going to start playing out in the US. And I'm like, yeah, I get the game. Like, we, as Americans, we did the exact same thing to the Native Americans. We came in, we're like, this place looks nice. And so how do you think through that problem?
Look, Golda Meir, who was the prime minister of Israel, I think maybe the fourth from maybe 1969 to 73 or something around that. I might get the numbers wrong. She was the first female prime minister. Has a couple of quotes that really capture the dilemma in that region. One thing she said is that if the Palestinians learn to love their children as much as they hate ours or something like that, then would have peace. Maybe I botched it a bit. And the second one is that if we put down our arms, there would be a genocide. If they put down their arms, there would be peace. It has nothing to do with piece of land. It has nothing to do with contested territories. Let me break it down for you. I recently discussed this on the Joe Rogan show, but it's worth repeating here for those of you who don't watch Joe Rogan. Islam has the concept, it's a duality concept. The world is divided into two. There is Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. Dar al-Islam means the house of Islam. Dar al-Harb, Harb in Arabic means the house of war. So the entire world is broken up into either blue or red. House of Islam or house of war. What does that mean? Any land that Islam conquers and then loses is forevermore canonically under the house of Islam. Any land that has not yet ever been colonized and conquered by Islam is in the house of war. It is to be conquered. That's why the end result is that Islam is peaceful, because it seeks peace through the unification of the entire world under the unifying flag of Allah. Okay? Now, in the Middle East, every single society that had existed prior to Islam has been eradicated, right? In Egypt, Coptic Christians were the majority. Now they constitute 10% of Egypt, okay? In Syria, there was huge Christians. Lebanon used to be a predominantly Christian country. Within my lifetime and yours, Lebanon went from being predominantly Christian to now being majority Muslim. Within our lifetime, not 500 years. What happened to the Iraqi Christians? Persia had a culture before Islam. Now it's become Islamic. So no ideology has conquered and colonized as much as Islam has. So if you're worried about the colonization of Zionism, then by any stretch of the imagination, if you're going to be logical, then you have to be worried and upset about the colonization of 56 countries that were once not Islamic, and in many cases they became Islamized through brute force. That's why there is the sword of Islam. It doesn't capture that we're going to cut bananas together. It captures that I put the sword to your neck, and when I conquer you, I give you choices, 3 choices. Either convert or die or live as a dhimmi. Dhimmi means as a not even second-class citizen. You're a third-class citizen, right? So, for example, Jews and Christians have often been tolerated under Islamic law. So for example, you hear about the golden period of Andalusia, right? Which is in current Spain. All that means is that you are tolerated until you're not, right? But you're always walking a precarious high wire, right? On any given moment, you better put on your really fast running shoes and run really fast because your head's going to be detached. So we lived very nicely in Lebanon until we didn't, right? And that's the history of the entire region. Now, Jews have existed in the Middle East for thousands of years before the word Islam ever came to be. So if we're going to use historical precedents, it's a game that the enemies of Judaism are going to lose. But here's what I propose. How about you teach your children that there could be people who live next to you. We can debate where we draw the line, but there is a group of people that have thousands of years of provenance to that land. By the way, Palestine, when you said Palestinians until recently, it referred to the indigenous Jews of that area called Palestine. Palestine, as you hear it today, is a concoction from the 1960s. There is no Palestinian people. They're Jordanian, they're Egyptian, right? There is no such thing as Palestine, other than it's a territory that has been mandated by different groups. A while back by the Ottomans, more recently British mandate, and so on. So imagine if we can teach the children of our neighbors that Jews have a right to exist. We can be neighbors. Let's love each other. It's perfectly natural for us to coexist. Do you think that Israel is actually interested in committing a genocide? Because if they wanted to commit a genocide, well, let's think it through. It would take well less than the time that I've been on this show today for every single Palestinian to be eradicated given Israel's might. Is that true? Is that a true statement? It is.
Sure.
Okay. Yet they haven't done. As a matter of fact, the Palestinian population has increased fivefold. So Jews are really shit at the genocidal game because population increased fivefold, right? When the Nazis were trying to exterminate the Jews, they were trying to get rid of them. They got rid of 6 million. So the reality is that Palestinians are taught that the highest value, to speak earlier about what we were talking about, what's your value, what's driving you in the morning. There is no greater goal than to liberate all of, hence, free Palestine from the river to the sea, from the Jordanian River to the Mediterranean Sea, free of Jews. I grew up in that world. I speak to those people. I mean, now it's harder for me to speak to them in Arabic because they recognize me. But 25 years ago, when I wasn't as known and I could mix amongst the folks who speak Arabic, it was very clear. Jews are a cancer in that region, and we must get rid of them as we have all other societies, right? So there are many other religions that had flourished historically in that region. They've all magically disappeared. Where are they? What happened to them? Crack a history book, okay?
Do you hear things like Christians are a cancer as well? Or is it just that their slow march to get people to convert or leave just
So that's
out?
a great question. So there is an expression, a saying in the Islamic context: first we come for the Saturday people, then we come for the Sunday people. The Saturday people are the Jews, the Sunday people are the Christians. So it always starts with the Jews, but it never just ends with the Jews, because again, a fair world, a just world is where everybody is Islamic. And I'll tell you
what I want to find though is there a specific animus for the Jews? Because if there's just like this sort of rolling thing of like, okay, we're 90% Christian now, but in 500 years, we're going to be 10% Christian. And that's just, we are better at propagating things, making people less comfortable being here, whatever. And so over a long enough time period, we're going to win in any region that we go to. But there's no particular animus for Christians or Jews. It's just like, we'll get rid of them. But if there's specific animus for Jews that there isn't for Christians, even though they've both been pushed out of the region, then obviously it begs the next question, which is why a specific animus for the Jews?
It's canonical. It's in the teaching.
In the Quran?
That's right. There are three quote holy books in Islam. There is the Quran, there is the Hadith, and then there is the Sirah, the biography of Muhammad. Okay. And now different people, they could be Quranic literalists who say, no, I only rely on the Quran. There are others the Hadiths are basically the deeds and the sayings of Muhammad. But and then there is a mechanism by which you assign to a particular story in the Hadith its veracity. So in Arabic, sahih means how true it is. And so here is a story that's narrated by such and such about how Muhammad did such and such. And by the way, because Muhammad is the ultimate model to emulate forevermore, then those stories are really important because they become moral teachings about how to act. So if Muhammad did behavior X, one of the reasons why, now you may think that behavior is reprehensible, but the reason why you can't say that behavior is reprehensible, because how could it be that the most perfect moral person that's ever lived would ever do something that is reprehensible? That's why you get the mental gymnastics of trying to justify why he did this and not that, okay? So those are the three books that you rely on. And we don't have to guess. Bill Warner, who is by training a physicist, so he's trained in the scientific method. Many years ago, he founded a center called the Center for the Study of Political Islam, where he applies what's called content analysis to answer such questions. Does the Quran and the Hadith have a lot of Jew hatred in them? Well, I don't have to guess that. I can use the scientific method to gauge that. How do you do that? So what content analysis does is it allows you to come up with a coding scheme to do the hermeneutics, the content analysis of any text. So for example, if I want to study literature, so never mind religious texts, I want to study how often in classic canons of Western literature do we place greater value on female beauty in the protagonist versus male beauty. So there is a tool I can use called the content analysis that would allow me to say, out of these 100 classic literature novels, 79% of all cases where a character is described regarding their beauty, it is female. So it's clear, it's clean. So I can go to those texts and study what those texts say about Jews. It's not pretty, Tom. It's really not pretty. As a matter of fact, Bill Warner compared the amount of Jew hatred in Mein Kampf. You know the guy with the little mustache?
I do.
You remember him?
Yeah, for better or worse.
Remember him? Okay. So Bill Warner does an analysis of Jew hatred in Islamic texts versus Mein Kampf. Oops, it doesn't look too good. So you don't need to believe Gad Saad, but you have to do something that most people, to go back to our earlier point, find very, very difficult to do. It's called think. It's very hard for me to go and apply my cognition. I'd rather just hear Barack Obama tell me that Islam is peace and it teaches peace. It doesn't, right? I mean, look, have we talked on this show about the Jew hatred that I faced growing up in Lebanon?
We certainly did the first time. I can't remember if we did last time, but the Jew hatred part we will certainly get to. What I'm trying to tease out is, so there is a narrative going around about what's happening with Israel,
yes,
that I think is very difficult to tease apart. So one narrative is that this is really just about this tit for tat, back and forth. You killed this person, we killed that person. If you start the clock at October 7th, this really gets crazy making. But if you take it back from just a question about whether more people were bombed on what side or how people were killed, it really gets deranging. Now, the way to start the clock for me is looking at when Israel itself as a nation was formed. That feels like it's a very important moment of how did it happen? What would I expect people to have a reaction to that? And then to spend time on the question of what are the consequences of Israel existing? I won't even ask whether it should exist, because now I'll leak my own bias. It does exist. It has existed for a while. And just like, so my wife's family half the family lived in the part of the part of Cyprus that got invaded and taken over by Turkey. They lost everything in an instant.
Turkey is what religion?
I will assume it is Islam.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, setting that aside for a second, they came in, divide the island in half. The north is now Turkish and the south is Greek. My stepmother-in-law lost everything again in an instant. And so I know somebody who will cry if you even bring it up. It was a very traumatic moment, obviously, for the family. But the response has been, it's divided, it's done. We're not going to go in and lose a bunch of life trying to reclaim this. We're, 50 years down the road. So that's very much the take I have. How it came to be is a very separate question from whether it should exist. It does exist. It's there. I think it has a right to defend itself, all that good stuff. But I can understand from you guys, Jewish people moved into the area, slowly built up the population, and now...
Some Jewish people moved into the area. There were many Jews who lived in that area for thousands of years before Islam existed. They are indigenous people.
Fair.
The Jews are indigenous to that land.
But I wouldn't expect that to be any comfort at all to the people that, just like are in Montreal right now. I don't expect it to be comforting to you if we suddenly found out that Muslims that lived there 1,000 years ago, right? It's like, sure, but my family's here, my value system reigns supreme, and slowly but surely people are coming in and asking me to live in their way.
So let me contextualize this for you in a very rich personal history. My brother-in-law is Egyptian Jews. African Jews, North African. His family is from Alexandria. That's where a lot of the Egyptian Jews were. Then in the 50s, it became untenable to be Jewish in Egypt, so they escaped and left. So remember that story. So kicked out of Egypt. Never mind Egypt of the pharaohs many thousands of years ago. Okay. My grandparents, some of them were Syrian Jews. They left Syria because it was now precarious to be Jewish in Syria. We ended up in Lebanon. We're all Lebanese. We were kicked out of Lebanon because we're Jewish. My wife's family is Lebanese Armenian. They were kicked out of Lebanon because they are Armenian Christians. Their ancestors, 1915, were exterminated in Turkey, right? So just within my family, I've just given you Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and Turkey. What's common to all those four is the ideology that's driving them. What's also common is that the victims of that ideology were a minority in that bigger land. So Israel, that's what happened to the Jews when they had to flee. Some decided to stay. So in 1948, the civilized world said, look, there are two peoples who live here. Let's divvy it up. We can debate about the details, but that'll put us into weeds that we'll never solve. The big 30,000-foot story, if I'm coming from Mars, is that there are two people who have historically lived there, sometimes nice together, sometimes not so nice. And usually when it's not so nice, there is a dynamic as to who's the perpetrator and who's the victim. That's unequivocal. And then one day the civilized world, in part precipitated by the fact that some really bad things had happened to Jews in the Holocaust, said, it would be fair. All peoples of the world have land that they call their own. It would be fair if a slice were given to these people and to those people. The Jews said, perfect, let's do it. And they took a very, very less than generous deal. The other group said, absolutely not. Now, the other group doesn't include Palestinians. It's the Arab world. That's why in 1948, there was a war of annihilation, which the Arabs lost. Then in 19...
So sorry, this is going to fractal really fast. And so I want to take one issue at a time.
Sure.
Okay, I want to see if I understand your position correctly on what it is like to encounter a Muslim population. So Muslims take over. That's part of the ethos of the religion. And that you didn't say this, but I have a feeling that this is part of what you're trying to stop me from doing. Not to get sucked into the level of the conversation about how Israel was formed. That's you're gonna miss the bigger point, which is I, Gad Saad, have a message to the West, and my message to the West is Muslim is a proselytizing religion. It will come into an area, it will build its numbers up, and it will, being generous using their own language, they will unite us all in peace under Allah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean, as I say that 99% of Muslims don't go about their day merrily living peaceful, good lives, not caring about any of the canonical texts that call for Islamic supremacy. But that's to be distinguished from what the dynamic of the demography will result in, which is there is no place that Islam has gone where there has been an increase of flourishing of people who were not Islamic. You know, we just have to crack books. There's a lot of data. There's 1,400 years of data across 56 countries. Okay. So Israel, the world decided it should exist. And Israel said, great, let's live together. Let's shake hands. The other camp said, that can't be right. By the way, on his deathbed, Muhammad said, promise me that you will rid Arabia of the Jews. That doesn't sound very peaceful. That seems like it's not a good idea. Okay, so now we have this bunch of Jews who are, they have the gall and chutzpah of being able to forge their own destiny, of actually being militarily powerful. No, I will tolerate the Jew as long as you are a good dhimmi. And if I decide that your daughter is really pretty and I'd like to marry her, you're going to fork her, right, Jew? That's what it's called to be a dhimmi. Open it. Dhimmi, by the way, you spell it in English, Dhimmi. Your viewers can go and read it later. Okay? So, yes, Jews are tolerated in Islamic lands until they're not tolerated. Know your place, Jew. Be quiet. Don't cause trouble. Okay? So, in 1948, a bunch of Arab countries decided to attack Israel, and they were going to solve the problem. And in which case, we would have free Palestine. Free Palestine would not have been, we're going to allow the Jew. It was an extermination war. They lost it. Then 1956 came along. In 1956, the president of Egypt was Gamal Abdel Nasser. He was a very charismatic populist guy. He was a pan-Arabist, meaning that he was trying to unite the entire Arabic nation. We're all one nation. In Islam, there's the concept of the Ummah. The Ummah is Islamic nation. I could be Malaysian, I could be Indonesian, I could be Albanian. We're all united under the family of Islam. It doesn't matter where I come from. Okay? So he and the rest of the Arabic countries in the region attacked Israel again. So now we have 1948, a war of extermination, they lost. 1956, war of extermination, they lost. 1967, another war, Six-Day War, they lost. 1973, Yom Kippur War, they lost. These are wars where many Arab countries, outnumbering the Israelis 100-1, attack to solve the problem, to have free Palestine from the river to the sea, done with the Jews. They lose. Now, Israel, in one of those wars, had won the entire Sinai Peninsula, which would make the landmass of Israel 50 times bigger. So if they were a colonialist who are trying to grab landmass, they would have kept that land. You attacked us, we won it, it's now part of our thing. They gave it back to Anwar Sadat when in 1978, the Camp David Accords, where Egypt recognized Israel. So Israel said, we're willing to give up a landmass that is 50 times bigger than all of current Israel, which we won in a war that you attacked us. But please F off. Can we live in peace? Okay. And then since that point, there's been several intifadas. Each of the intifadas is to solve the Jewish problem, right? In the Hamas charter, it says you're going to annihilate not just the Jews in Israel, all Jews. There is a hadith that says the world will not end until the tree speaks out and says, oh, there's a Jew hiding behind me. That's not, you can go look it up, right? Now, does that mean that every Muslim is walking around wishing to kill Jews? Of course not. Do I have tons of Muslim friends who come to my house and don't give a shit about any of this? Of course, yes. But Islam as an ideology, is it one that promotes individual flourishing coexistence? No. So nothing could be clearer than that. So, I didn't give a damn about Israel until October 7th. I mean, I have a lot of family there, but I didn't even care so much about my Judaism. But I know that the other folks care about my Judaism. So it became really important for me to be Jewish post October 7th. And when I was running really fast as a kid to not be decapitated. Being Jewish is number 977 of interesting things about Gad Saad. But you're forcing me to care about my Judaism, because when I'm afraid to walk on campus because there's a bunch of maniacs screaming from the river to the sea, then I have to care about being Jewish. But if I could never hear about being Jewish again, I would be perfectly happy. So this problem will be resolved when the Palestinians decide that the world, life is short and there are such incredible things to do together. When they internalize that message and say, there are people over there who are not Muslim and they have a right to exist, and I will no longer teach my children to want to aspire to kill them in a holy jihad, we will have peace. Until then, we'll never have peace.
Okay, I want to say your position back to you to make sure that I understand.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak for so long.
Yeah, and of course, this obviously is one of the most difficult and intractable problems of our time. My thing is, I want to understand where everybody actually is, and I understand that you don't live in Israel, and like you said, being Jewish is not a big part of your identity, but I also think that you understand this problem better than a lot of people. So, okay, I want to say back your position to make sure that I understand it, that if going back to the Golda Meir, I think that was
Golda Meir,
the quote that she had, that if we put down our weapons, there will be a genocide. If they put down their weapons, then there will be peace. That we are in a situation where Israel has, since its forming, been attacked multiple times, won those wars, has taken over 50 times roughly the territory that they have now.
Maybe not 50, but that was hyperbole. But
very large amount of territory. They go to Egypt, they say, hey, we're perfectly willing to give that back because we want peace. But there is something in the relationship between Israel and what we would now call the state of Palestine or Palestinian people. I'm well aware of all the controversy there, including that they were not considered a people until like 1967 is the first time, if you check the Engrams report, that you'll see them being referenced as the Palestinian people. I understand how that's a potential manipulation. But I also understand that even people in Manhattan think of themselves as a people. And if suddenly they found themselves having a reason to identify, we are Manhattanites, then all of a sudden you'd be like, well, nobody ever talked about Manhattanites. But it'd be pretty disingenuous to not think that they had an identity. So you've got that remaining friction there. You believe that the animosity is driven by something innate to Islam as a faith that is it is canonically anathema for them to have a Jewish state on land that was previously in the house of Islam.
Yes.
We have the House of Islam, the House of War.
It was ruled by the Ottomans. The Ottomans are Islamic. It cannot revert. Andalusia today in Spain, the Islamists will say, inshallah, we will reconquer it, because there was a period in the period of Andalusia that it was controlled by Islam. Therefore, Spain itself is Islamic land.
Understood. Okay, so because of that doctrine, that is the reason that there is this ongoing animosity that is never going to stop, because it is baked into the religious doctrines. And that this is also why you don't want it exported to the West, because you understand how that plays out. Okay. Have I understood everything so far? Okay. So the point of collision that I see now is when I mentioned Cyprus getting cut in half, that felt like, well, this is what they do, right? Turkey is an Islamist nation. And so, of course, they're going to do that in keeping with all the things that I just laid out. But Israel did that in the land that they now hold. They came in, they built up people, and then eventually worked with the British and the French to do back deal tradings and get into the whole Lawrence of Arabia thing, where even he felt like, oh God, we're betraying the Arabic people and doing what we're doing. And so anyway, the Jews end up getting Israel as a state and
which is a small part of a much bigger partition.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. All I'm getting to is when I talk about it on Cyprus, it's like, yeah, bad on Turkey for doing that. But when I talk about the Israelis doing it, it's understandable. And I'm just saying, to me, that's going to, while I actually agree with your, it is true that until the Palestinians think about a wonderful future for their children, and that's it. They're just obsessed with that. I want to get my kids educated. I want to make sure that their world is materially better. I want them to believe that their kids will be better than their lives, which are better than my life. Like that is a way of thinking that with my value system leads to prosperity. And I don't understand anybody that points in any other direction. But that point is the one area where I step back as somebody who's, I'm just obsessed with what's going to work.
Yeah.
And I see this remaining point of friction where until, and I don't even know that this will solve a problem, but it seems self-evident to me that Israel did come in, they colonized the land, they won. And that's going to have a consequence.
It depends what you mean by colonized. Jews were on that land. All we did is we drew a line that said that this is where now we're going to create. It's not, they didn't magically come from Arkansas. Jews are not
from all over Europe, though.
By the way, they came from all over Europe, precisely explaining why you need a land of Israel or Judea, because they were kicked out of many places. So all that happened is that through a civilized mechanism, it wasn't through war, it wasn't through butchery. The civilized world said, there are two peoples who live there. Let's draw some lines. We can debate which is a good way to draw it or not, where this side will be for Jews, this side will be for non-Jews.
But imagine that happened in Montreal. You would not be happy.
It's happened in every single millimeter on Earth since Lucy walked out of Africa. It's called history.
100%.
So, for example, Saudi Arabia was dominated by several Jewish tribes. So let's now have a return of those Jews to Saudi Arabia. So history, the world history, is a forensic accounting of who did what to whom, right? Mm-hmm. So now let's talk Palestinian, okay? In 1974, okay, I'm going to tell these personal stories because there's going to be a lesson at the end of it, okay? And I'm going to give you the punchline. Move on already. And we're going to link it back to the other thing. We lived in Lebanon. The PLO came. PLO is the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They came in, headed by several factions. Fatah, Abu Nidal, Yasser Arafat. The PLO came in, caused havoc in Lebanon. Okay. In 1974, my eldest brother, who now lives in Montreal, who married a Christian Palestinian girl, okay, which didn't go well either for her family or my family. And by the way, they eloped, to your earlier anecdote, where to get married? In Cyprus. Because in Lebanon, because you have to typically be married by religious authorities, interfaith marriages were frowned upon. The only way you could get married is by eloping to Cyprus, which is like a 20-minute plane ride. You take off, you land in Cyprus, you get married, you come back. In 1974, before the Civil War started, my brother and his then either wife or wife-to-be, who had blonde hair, which is a rarity in the context of the Middle East where people are darker, were stopped by a PLO militia checkpoint. And they looked at my brother and said, "Ooh, that's a nice looking watch." He said, "Oh, you're not getting that watch. That's a gift from my mother." Then they looked and said, "Wow, that the wife of yours, she's really pretty, the blonde," which means you either fork up the watch or it's going to be a problem for your thing, okay? Very shortly afterwards, my brother and his wife, who they've since divorced, emigrated to Montreal before the Civil War. Let's move on now to when we were living in Lebanon during the Civil War. We ended up having our home stolen and taken by Palestinian refugees. Yes, you're quoting this? Okay. My parents, on one of their return trips to Lebanon in 1980, were kidnapped by Palestinian militia and tortured. And I won't get into the details of what happened to them. And okay, I sit in front of you. So that's a small part of my experience. Our home was stolen by Palestinian. My brother was left Lebanon because of Palestinian intimidation. My parents were tortured, and I won't tell you my mother and so on. Today, I don't hold animus to Palestinians. It's a very ugly part of my childhood. It's a tragic part of my family history, but I have fucking moved on. The way that I conquer life is I put those things behind me and I say I'm going to live a dignified life that is hopefully meaningful, that hopefully I contribute to life. I don't hate all Palestinians. The Palestinians who did the things that they did to us are not the Palestinian that I meet today. I've moved on. That doesn't negate the fact that bad things happened to me. Imagine if the Palestinians had that same mindset. Was there on a particular farm an older gentleman who was removed from that land when they redrew the thing? Absolutely. Is there someone who suffered in the redrawing of the line in 1948? 100%. What's the solution? Because you got to get out of this. This where your beautiful house is does not belong to you, asshole. There's someone else who has claim to this place. Where I live in Montreal, it's Algonquin and Iroquois land. I shouldn't be there. Or we recognize that that's history. Bad things have happened throughout history, and we move forward. That doesn't mean that we ignore what happened to them. It's part of the fabric of who I am, but I move on. So the only pathway, there is nothing unique about what happened to the Palestinians. As a matter of fact, what happened to the Palestinian is astoundingly less violent than other places where people were taken over. It wasn't done through violence. It was the civilized world saying, I'm going to redraw the map. So move on. But you can't move on because it is baked in the fabric of your identity. There can't be Jews there. And therefore, as long as you've got that mind parasite, we're never going to solve it. So I'm giving you a personal story. I have faced much greater hardships than the keffiyeh Karen who buys her keffiyeh from Columbia University through Amazon. She's not a real Palestinian. My family was married to Palestinians. My parents were tortured by Palestinians. But I've moved on. Why can't they move on? Why is there a unique United Nations refugee group that is only reserved to Palestinian? What about the Sudanese? What about the Yazidis? What about the endless other Islamic refugees that are not Palestinian? They don't have the dignity, but that's what parasitic thinking is. There's something unique about the Palestinian problem. You know why? Because the perpetrator are called Jews. No Jews, no news. Where are the protests for the Yazidis that were raped in the thousands? Where was the protest? What happened to the Sudanese? What's happening with the Nigerian Christians that are being slaughtered by Boko Haram in Nigeria? Way more than anything that's happening with Israel. But it's not the Jews doing it. Therefore, we yawn in apathy. What happened to Bashar al-Assad killing 500,000 of his own people, Muslims? Why weren't there any protests? Because it doesn't matter. But Jews, if they do something wrong, in quotes, then we react. So it's baked into the endemic Jew hatred that is part of that reality. Once you get rid of that, once you say, I want to live a dignified life that is greater than simply hating the Jews, we will have peace. And by the way, once you unleash the cultural richness of the Middle East, by the way, I love Arab. I'm Arabic, right? If you ask me, what are you? I don't say I'm Jewish. I say I'm Lebanese. I'm Lebanese. I regret that my kids didn't learn Arabic. I don't say they didn't learn Hebrew. I speak Arabic, right? The Arabic people are hospitable. You want to come to our house for dinner? Prepare to have stretch pants. 15 pounds you're going to put on. We're hospitable. When I say we, I don't mean Jews. I mean Arabic people. There is such cultural richness in the Middle East that if you can get rid and get over the hump of this ridiculous religious tribalism. By the way, there are Jews who are also very tribal in their animus toward, not nearly as much, but I know some of them, some really ultra-Orthodox Jews that are not fans of, right? But I am an Arabic Jew, so I can navigate through both. There is potential. You know, you have oil in the land. There is this potential that's waiting to be unleashed. Instead of what happened to Gaza today, where it's bombed into oblivion, look at the images before October 7th. It was a gorgeous place with hotels up. Why don't you build universities there? Why don't you turn it into Singapore? Why don't you turn it into the Silicon Valley of the Middle East? Such bright people, such hospitable people, such warm people, such love. But you've got this religious ideology that doesn't allow people to coexist. Solve that problem, you'll win the Nobel Prize, and you will have eternal peace. Simple as that.
What would this have looked like if Christians had come in and taken Jerusalem? And for anybody that thinks that sounds crazy, during the Crusades, that's exactly what they did from time to time.
They did.
And certainly was their aim. Would this be, they would have moved on by now because there's no Jewish tension, or
there would still be tension because, so look, the way, remember I mentioned earlier, dhimmi, which is this, the status of, this is Ahl al-Kutub. Ahl al-Kutub means the people of the book, meaning that monotheists like Christians and Jews can be tolerated when Islam comes in because they are people of the book, as long as they live as dhimmis. So the animus also applies to Christians. This is why you also have what I said earlier, first we come for the Saturday people, then we come for the Sunday people. So it's not as though Christians have it nice and easy, but there is something unique that is baked into the Jew hatred. Because remember, now, we can speculate, although the speculation is pretty veridical, why that originated.
What do you mean pretty veridical?
Pretty accurate. So I'm speculating as to why Muhammad was so filled with Jew hatred. Maybe it's worth to give you a bit of an Islamic lesson. I mean, not necessarily just to you, for the audience. There are two periods that Muhammad had in his career. There is the Meccan period and the Medinan period. The Meccan period is where he was preaching a message that was a lot more peaceful. You have your religion, I have mine. No compulsion in religion. The Islamic apologists will quote you those parts. Okay. Then he moved to Medina. And in Medina, he changed his marketing message. It became a lot more violent. He went from being able to only attract a few people in many, many years of proselytizing to conquering huge swaths of land and getting millions of adherents once he changed his key pitch. Okay? Are you with me?
Yep.
Now, the Quran has elements from both the Meccan period and the Medinan period. At times, they contradict each other. How could they contradict each other when every single syllable in the Quran is the final inerrant word of Allah that could never be changed? Well, then you come up with a mechanism called abrogation. Abrogation is the mechanism that seeks to theologically reconcile contradictions in the Quran. If an earlier passage says no compulsion in religion, the Jews are not they have their right to their thing. If a later verse in the Medinan period says the opposite, the later verse abrogates the earlier verse. It nullifies it. It's null and void. That's called abrogation. So your viewers can go and read it. So therefore, he started going around and saying, hey, I'm the final messenger, right? And then people said, yes, sir. There's this one asshole group of folks. Do you know who they're called? They're called Jews, who said, sorry, Muhammad, thanks, we're good. We've had a monotheistic religion for thousands of years. We're good. We're not converting. So in the dynamic, in the ecosystem of Arabia in the time of Muhammad, there was one pesky group of folks who didn't want to receive his message. That's why on his deathbed, promise me that you will rid Arabia of the Jews. So therefore, to answer your question in a very big theological way, there is unique animus to the Jews because they were particularly staunch in their rejection of him being the final prophet. Therefore, they're assholes. They need to be exterminated. Everybody's falling in line except those assholes. Okay? So that's baked into the religion. Now let's fast forward 1400 years. In my reality, growing up amongst Islamic folks, you probably heard me mention this. 6 degrees of Jew. I tell you any calamity, how many causal steps does it take for you to blame it on the Jew? In the context of the Middle East, it takes one link. Hi, Ahmad, let's kill the Jews. Let's go have coffee. That's it. That's the way the mindset works. It rained today, it's the Jews. It didn't rain today, it's the Jews. My wife had an extramarital affair. Who's the porn peddler? Jews control the porn industry. Had she not watched porn, she would have never had those. By the way, those are not things that I'm making up. Those are real things that are said. I'll give you a very good example. I posted about 2 months ago a set of a police lineup of a gang of men who had been caught grooming and gang raping young British girls in Huddersfield, which is a small town in England. Now, you may or may not know this, but there's been about 25, 30 years of industrial scale level gang rape of young British girls. This is government reports. You can go check it later, which the government kept trying to suppress because it would be, say the word with me, Islamophobic if that came out, right? So they would arrest the fathers who would walk in as their daughters were being raped. You can go all check it out. By the way, if you want to see a guy, go check out Tommy Robinson, who's a British patriot who's been fighting this for 20 years. I recently had him on my show. So I put up, now this happens in Rotherham, it happens in Rockdale, it happens in Oxford, it happens in Huddersfield. It's up and down Britain. 90% plus, 95% of all the perpetrators are Asian men. Well, I'm Asian. They're not referring to the Lebanese Jew, but that's a euphemism because you don't want to say what they really are. In France, you don't call them what they are, you call them les jeunes, the youths. You always have to come up with a euphemism because it would be Islamophobic to say what they really are, okay? Now, I put up the image of the 20 guys that had been caught, and their names are listed because they were going to be arrested and convicted and so on. Their names, you want me to summarize their names for you?
Sure.
Or Muhammad, Ahmad, 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 Muhammad, 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 Ahmad, Muhammad, Hussein, Muhammad, Muhammad, Ahmad, Muhammad. Okay. I put up in my typical satire, I said, I don't have the big data analytic brain to be able to use some kind of algorithm to see what is common to these guys. Could somebody help me out and find the common thread? Guess what? 1 million Jew haters came and said who was to blame for that.
The Jews.
Why?
This is unfortunately, I know, again, a punchline because I know you so well, but because they control the open borders.
George Soros is an open border society guy. He's a Jew. He's an acolyte of Karl Popper, who was a very famous philosopher, Jew, who started the open society. Therefore, anytime you have the reflex of Western societies having open borders, that reflex stemmed from behind the scenes, the diabolical Jew parasitizing the otherwise noble Westerners who wanted to protect their land. So when 3 Muhammads gang rape your daughter, it's Mordechai to really blame. So how can you then fight that? If you can't even muster your ire and direct it to the culprit of the rape, then we're doomed. And by the way, since October 7, I've seen that expanded to levels that are unimaginable. I mean, I've seen it all. I grew up in the Middle East, but I was taken aback by the level of Jew hatred after October 7th. Everything is blamed on the Jew. And I mean, I try to interact with people, even anonymous people that have egg as their bio. Everything can be linked back to the Jew. Everything. I mean, literally, I'm surprised that the assassination attempt on Trump hasn't been convincingly linked to some Mossad thing.
Give it a minute.
Give it a minute. Exactly.
It's still so early.
It's still very early.
So how the hell do we end up there? Like, what is it? So that becomes its own parasite idea that somehow people latch onto in a way that I've never quite understood. There's 2 people that have commented on this that I find very interesting. And one of them is Thomas Sowell. And Thomas Sowell said, for the Jews to stop being persecuted, all they have to do is fail.
Exactly.
Which I thought was brilliant. And then Jordan Peterson, who said they have a standard deviation increase in IQ, and it just creates problems.
Envy is in the 7 deadly sins for a reason, right? It is a deadly cardinal sin because the moral philosophers and theologians who came up with those 7 sins understood human frailties. And envy is right there because it is such a, as we discussed earlier when we were talking about conspicuous consumption, it is such a driving force of the architecture of the human mind. Now, in any society where Jews end up, so I'm going to borrow here a term from Professor Amy Chua, who's a law professor at Yale, and a friend of mine who's been on my show. She introduced the term market dominant minorities, meaning these, so you can have, for example, in Indonesia, there may be Chinese minority that controls 70% of the economy of that. So that's called a market dominant minority. Well, wherever Jews go, to use her term, they're a market dominant minority because by definition, they're a very small number. I appeared once on the Joe Rogan show and I asked him, precisely because I knew he would fall into the trap. I said, can you guess, Joe, how many Jews there are in the world? And then he paused and he goes, 1 billion? I said, is that your final answer? He goes, no, you know what? 500 million. And then I told him, it's about 14, 15 million. And then he goes, Jamie is in the background, who's the producer who does the fact checking on you. And then he checks, he goes, oh my God, you're right. I said, well, what do you think? I just made up the shit? Okay, so it was about 14, 15 million. But you somehow think that there's many more because in medicine, in filmmaking, in art, in philosophy, in academia, in law, and everything, there is an astounding disproportionality to the number of Jews. So I could do one of 2 things at that point if I'm a non-Jew. I could say, what's the secret of those assholes? Yeah. So I can emulate. So to go into your prescriptive world, what is the algorithm that they're running so that I can emulate them and I'm going to beat those assholes? Or I could succumb to envy and say, those diabolical assholes. And so that's what you get. Now, let's go back again to the self-serving bias, attributing successes internally and failures externally. When I walk around in the Middle East as a average Middle Easterner and my life is sucky, but when I go to the hospital, the director is a Jewish guy, and when I go to the university, the top professors are, God damn it, but I thought we were the believers. Muhammad promised us that we're the thing, yet those diabolical evil Jews seem to be controlling everything. Well, what do you think I'm going to do? They're the shaitan. Shaitan is the devil. They're the devil. As a matter of fact, there are some people who think that we just have to really scratch here to really see my horns. That's taught in school. So
we both know you took them off before we started filming. So
exactly
it's
true.
Ridiculous.
Exactly. And by the way, if you look in my back,
tail.
you see a bit of the tail.
Obviously.
Because we're rats. We are descendants, as it says in the Quran, of rats and pigs.
Whoa.
That's a nice thing to say. That's a very peaceful thing to say. So my point is, are most Muslims lovely? Of course. There are asshole Jews and nice Jews. There are asshole Muslims. And the distribution is no different. All people have nice and bad. We're talking about ideology. To use, again, your mindset, what is the optimal algorithm that will lead to maximal individual flourishing? Well, we certainly have all the data from 1400 years that says we shouldn't be signing up for more Islam in our societies. Does that mean that we shouldn't let Muslims in? Of course not. But when you come in, you leave that stuff at the door. If you have any beliefs that are antithetical to our foundational values, you're not welcome here. If you leave them at the door, come in, my brother, let's build a great society that's built on plurality. That's great. So if Islam decides that that's what it wants to do, then I think there'll be no problems. But that's not what it wants to do. And the only catalyst, when you have shingles, it lives in you, and then it could at one point come out. And when it comes out, or you could live with it your whole life and it never erupts. So what happens with Islam? It's not going to cause major problems when the numbers are still very low. That's why if October 7th, by the way, had happened 25 years ago, you wouldn't have seen the rabid Jew hatred on campuses that you see today. Why? Because today you have sufficient numbers to hold the rest of us hostage. So now extrapolate in 20 more years with open borders. You won't only have Dearborn and Minnesota, where what's her name, the Somali, Ilhan Omar, right? It'll be all over the place, and now they'll get into the politics, and now for example, at my university, there had never been. Quebec is very, very anti-religion historically because there was a pushback against the Catholic Church, and so Quebec was founded on, in French you say laïcité, secularism. Okay. But then, I've been a professor at my university for 30 plus years. We never had religious accommodations. There were many, many religions that were around. But about 10 years ago, we had to have a meeting to talk about religious accommodations. Whose religious accommodations do you think we had to worry about?
I can't guess.
Yeah, there you go. Because now the numbers were sufficiently high that the accommodations were coming, not violently, but there was a finger pointed at you. But in 20 years, inshallah, when there'll be a lot more of us, it won't be the finger that's pointed at you. So I only tell the truth as taught to us by history, never mind personal experience. So you can ignore it, but you can ignore it at your peril. It's coming for you. Okay? It might take 5 years, it might take 500 years. But as the Taliban said to the Americans, you have all the watches, but we have all the time in the world. So it's a slow game. Sometimes we go into a society and we eradicate you in 10 minutes. Sometimes it takes 600 years for us to become majority. But we will become majority. One final point, I'll cede the floor back to you. Islamic, they call them Islamists, but there's really no distinction between Islamism and Islam. Islamism is just an inherent part of Islam. Islamism is just the political wing of Islam. Okay. Islamists said many years ago that we're going to conquer the West through means. And you've probably heard me mention this before. Number one, we're going to conquer the West through the womb of our women. Demography. You idiots don't even have the 2.17 replacement rate that is needed. You produce 1 point something. We produce 4.6. We can enter into a calculation to tell us when it will be that we will be majority. So number one, we will conquer the West through the womb of our women. Number two, we will conquer the West through hijrah. Hijrah is the Arabic word for migration, right? Muhammad migrated from Mecca to Medina. Okay, so we will conquer the West through migration. Go ask what the Germans think now about their open door policies. And number three, we will conquer the West by using your miserable freedoms against you. And that's what They do. So they're telling you what they want to do. Now, again, 99% of Muslims couldn't give a damn about anything that I'm saying here. They just want to live peaceful lives. But it's a demographic game. So if you wish to retain your freedoms, you have to be careful about any ideology. Listen, if there were extremist Jews that were bent on imposing their beliefs on us, I would be sitting here talking to you and saying, be wary of too many Mordechais. But that's not what Jews do, right? So it's not a unique... my warnings are not dispositional to the traits of Muslims, right? When people attack me, they attack me dispositionally. I am a cancer by virtue of being Jewish. It's in my innateness. I am a rat. I am a colonizer. I'm a baby killer. I'm evil. I'm demonic. I never say this about Muslims. I don't believe that. Because it's not dispositional. They are parasitized by an ideology that tells them that they have to conquer the world. Rid of that, and we have no problems.
Where do you think the intersection of this meets with the suicide of the West as we look at the campuses? I don't know how to make sense of what I see on campus.
Well, I mean, I posted, you probably remember it, and probably about 2 weeks after the October 7th, I posted a tweet that went viral. I don't know, 20, 30 million people read it. And it went viral because it speaks to the question you're asking, because unlike my usual demeanor, where even when I'm dealing with very serious issues, there's a twinkle in my eye, I'm smiley, I'm the happy warrior, I joke around. It was very solemn. It was very ominous. Because I was almost conceding defeat of the West, because I was basically saying that all of the corrective measures that would be required to save Western values, I don't see them being done. I see us doubling down on the policies that have led us here. And then that you can't, how could you win if that's the case, right? If I'm your physician, you come to me and I say, Tom, I'm very, very sorry to tell you, you have cancer. And then your answer is, well, there is no such thing as cancer. And if there is cancer, it's the Jews who did it. Well, and if it's cancer, it's probably the Jews who are holding back the cure. And by the way, I'm going to prove to you that there's no cancer because I'm going to inhale this bag of asbestos. Well, then I'm going to say, okay, well, I thought that you had 3 months to live. You probably have a week to live. Okay. So that's what's happening with the warnings that people like me get. By the way, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, do you know who she is? Yeah. Right? Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a Somali of Muslim background. She's had genital mutilation done on her. Oof. Right? When she goes around saying, hey, be careful, Islam is not here to live peacefully amongst you, what do people call her? Racist. She's a black Somali Muslim. She's racist because Kafia Karen, who is from Arkansas originally, who goes Free Liberation Palestine and bought her kafia at Amazon, knows Islam more than me and Ayaan Hirsi Ali. So that's why I worry about what you're talking about. Because if you can't get Westerners to wake up to say, this is tolerable in our society, this is not. And that's why my next book, Suicidal Empathy, exacerbates the problem. Because it basically says, it's gauche for you to criticize Islam. Nobody is criticizing individual Muslims who are just as lovely and nice as anybody else. If I now criticized communism, let's do an analogy. Is communism the ideal socio-political economic system for maximal individual flourishing?
Definitely not.
Definitely not. And we could say that, and you wouldn't be afraid of being accused of being a communistophobe. And that you suffer.
Communistophobe.
Right. But when the ideology cloaks itself in the robe of religion, that's it, kryptonite. Don't say a word. You have no right to criticize my religion. By the way, I could show you clips of imams in Montreal caught, I'm guessing surreptitiously, at their sermon talking about the extermination of Jews. And yet the authorities go, yeah, but he said it at a mosque. So I mean, if it were Hitler saying the extermination of Jews, he's saying it outside a religious thing. So that would be gauche. But can you really criticize? I mean, that's his religion. He's got a right to say that. So once we lose that reflex and say, no, any ideology, if Judaism tomorrow goes insane and starts preaching things that are contrary to our Western values, I'm going to stand up and fight against Judaism. So it's nothing. I didn't wake up and say, I want to spend my time criticizing Islam. As a matter of fact, for 25 years in Montreal, I never uttered the word Islam. It was in my rear view mirror. I left Islam, but then Islam came for me in Montreal, and it's coming for you tomorrow. So be careful. Listen to the people who've immigrated from those societies and heed their warnings. Nothing good can come from a society that loses its fundamental individual rights. And Islam is a collectivist society. You're part of the ummah, just like Mao Zedong, just like communism. By the way, in Orthodox Judaism, they all dress the same way. Why? Because individuality is the enemy of a collectivist ideology. How dare you choose your sartorial garb and your colors? No, you're just an insignificant ant. And by the way, I get pissed. I'm Jewish. When we walk in the Jewish neighborhoods and I see them all like that, you should see the things that I tell my wife. So you might think I'm anti-Semitic then. Because I say, what kind of nonsense is this? You're stuck 5,000 years ago where the kids will only learn how to read a single book, the Torah. They don't know about poetry from the Renaissance. They don't know any of that stuff.
They don't know about Harry Potter, bro. Come on.
They know about Harry Potter, right? That pisses me off. What if Gad Saad had been born in a Hasidic community? I couldn't have had the dignity to study evolutionary psychology because I have to spend by the way, a rabbi told me, he was telling me about, we want to marry our daughters to scholars. And when I said, well, I'm a professor, and I said, no, but that's not really a scholar. A scholar is someone who studies the Torah, the Talmud. They're scholars. You're doing fake bullshit, right? So I'm also against those guys, right? So I'm against anything that is contrary to individual flourishing. Live and let live. Don't mess with me. I won't mess with you. So to go back to the Middle East, let's have a separation. Let's intermingle if we want to. Let's recognize the Palestinian right to exist. You do the same. And let's shake hands and let's create a cool environment. Simple as that.
I love it. Gad, this has been my favorite sit down with you for sure.
Oh, thank you.
Where can people follow along with you?
Well, on X, because I don't want to say Twitter, on X, it's at Gad Saad, Gadsaad. I host a show that is available both on YouTube and on podcast. It's called The Sad Truth. You can read all of my books. I usually respond to emails, although it's becoming a bit more difficult. You could send me an email. I'm everywhere where you look. I haunt your dreams.
I love it. All right, everybody, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace. If you like this conversation, check out this episode to learn more.
What social media and just the democratization of everything has given us is some insight into how rotten our institutions were in the first place.
There's a kind of wokeification of the right that is happening.
It's like professional wrestling. Nobody cares that it's fake. If I